I don't think people today have very poor attention spans, as people say. I think they have very poor curiosity spans.
Shravan, founder and CEO of Rethink Systems and a product management expert with over 9 years of experience at top companies like Flipkart, Blackbuck, and Byju. Shravan's passion for teaching has helped over 500 professionals land roles at giants like Microsoft, Google, and Meta.
Life is not like chess. It's like poker. Unpredictable things happen and unpredictable behavior happens, right? That is not something that you can write in a uniform form of code. Education is only valuable when it's transformative. Insights come from observations, but not all observations are insights. One of the things that people have to realize is that in order to build depth, you have to go inwards rather than outwards. Skills are an extension of how deeply do you understand a problem. You become wise by figuring out the things between the lines. It is that wisdom that makes you better. You remember 10% of what you read and 20% of what you write, 30% of what you practice and 60% of what you teach. And if you really want to become a very good critical thinker, go and teach.
Right? How should a PM be creating a resume to really stand out? Because in this market, every job has 600, 1,000 applications.
Yeah. It's the smallest of things which essentially can be deal breakers while you look at a resume. And I think a lot of times when people write resumes, the first mistake that they do is...
Shravan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Akash. Lovely always speaking to you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I think we first hopped on a Zoom call 3 years ago now, so it's been quite a while that we've known each other.
Absolutely. And I've been a follower of your content, learned so much from it. So it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Likewise. If you haven't seen Shravan's explainers in Hinglish on YouTube, they're not only informative but hilarious. So let's get started. Why has Byju's fallen so hard? You were a lead PM there. You were associated with their brand. You're on their YouTube page. But the company has had a precipitous fall from grace.
I think it's a very interesting question and people ask me, and let me set a little context for you, right? The thing that I've noticed over the last 6, 7, 8 years is, right, there's something called the founder's bubble, right? It's a very funny thing, but I'll tell you what it means. It stems from what I call the staircase of the self, right? People generally, when they start in their careers, they generally don't have that self-worth or something like that, right? And then what happens over time is as you do things of importance, at least to you, right? You start building that self-worth. A lot of times, the next step from building that self-worth moves into pride and ego, right? Oh, I'm good at this. I've done this. I've already scaled this company to $100 million, right? And I think to start off, to set context is Byju is an excellent teacher. No matter what people say, I know it seems like a very controversial opinion, but that's true. Starting a company from a background of a tier 3 town in India, then essentially scaling that across business into a very competitive exam space, and then essentially moving into the K-12 space. These are all leaps. People did not do them 10, 15 years back. The fastest way people could get education was the offline way, going to places like Kota and other places to prepare for the competitive exams that they say in the country, right? So what happened, I think, was around 2017 and 18, right? They started realizing that there is a lot to do in the synchronous learning platform. And how do I define synchronous learning is there's a structure to the learning. And it's an online learning class. Like you come into the class, today you have a physics class, then after that you have a chemistry class. And what they wanted to do was kind of solve two things. The first thing was, is there access to distribution? What I mean by that is access to a great quality teacher, right? And that was very expensive, 15 years back, right? That they solved that. The second thing they wanted to solve was personalized attention, right? And that is something that is very hard to do online. Right? How do you make somebody feel motivated in an online class when the teacher is not sitting with you? I think that tenet was very amazing. But as COVID hit, right, because of the sheer advent of, how do I put it, it was a strategic inflection point, right, where funding came in and a lot of things started happening.
Today's episode is brought to you by June, the customer analytics for product-focused teams. Are you not sure what users do in your SaaS? What features they use the most? Do you wish that you could know what each company does and use this information to generate incremental lift in revenue? June is the product analytics platform you need. It generates profiles for each of your customers that get you closer to your most important ones. It also connects your product data to your CRM so you can get a full view of your customers in one place. So you can engage with the right message at the right time. What makes June different is that it's made for B2B SaaS. It comes with account-level analyses, fast ways to look up your customers, and CRM integrations to share this information between your product, your success, and sales teams. And one line of code is all you need, and you're good to go. Sign up for a free trial today at june.so/Akash. That's june.so/AAKASH. You get a discount if you use my link. This episode is brought to you by Dovetail, the AI-first customer insights hub for all teams. Dovetail has always been the go-to tool for teams that want to find insights in customer calls, user interviews, or documents. Now they've stepped it up with the release of Dovetail 3.0. It's 3 new products and a ton of AI features that make it faster and easier than ever before to truly get to the heart of what your customers want. You can get a real-time pulse on what your customers are thinking with Dovetail's automated feedback analysis platform, Channels, or pull summaries and insights from every customer interaction your team has ever had using their conversational AI, Ask Dovetail. You can even recruit from over 3 million participants directly in Dovetail. All of this is just the tip of the iceberg. Dovetail wants to give everyone in the organization instant access to their customers at any time. From roadmaps, discovery to strategy sessions, and more, it's never been easier to make customer-centric decisions. The good news? Listeners of this podcast can try Dovetail's Pro plan along with their newest products and features free for 30 days. Just go to dovetail.com/Akash.
They started realizing that they started forgetting that ethos that education takes time. Education is only valuable when it's transformative, right? And they started moving towards acquiring businesses, saying that this is how we'll cover the market and things like that. And what happened at that point is, as you scale, as you get away from your core customers, which made you who you are, right? You start listening to things of people around you. And in more often than not, those things are what you want to hear because there's a founder's bias. Right? That you feel, oh, I scaled this company from 0 to 100 million. I am the best person to do that. And what really happens was that over time, right, this founder's bubble becomes very, very sporadic because anybody who's coming with a divergent opinion that maybe you're not doing well, right, is generally frowned upon because everything is going well, right? And because of the sheer amount of hierarchy it gets built over time, the actual thing which is happening on the ground, the time taken from that information to reach to the CEO is where all the debacle happens. I talk a lot about, like, people ask me this question that you've heard so many negative reviews about Byju's, etc. And I keep asking PMs and builders this question that out of 100 people, how many of people do you really think were your supporters? How many were kind of your distractors and how many just didn't care? And you'll be surprised to know that 95% of the audience just didn't care. Right? It's the 2% noise that you keep listening again and again that leads to your downfall. And I think that really happened because the thing, and this is something that I've seen predominantly in founders who move from like Series A to Series B and then Series B to Series C, because there is some level of credibility that's getting developed by the way that they scale. And the Byju started listening to feedback, which is not very relevant. People were saying that at that point when you don't listen and eventually you end up making bad choices. And by the time you realize that those bad choices are going to lead to your downfall, it's already too late. So I think that's what happened in a very small way, succinct way. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like he just got a bunch of yes men around him and wasn't able to create kind of a good debate around what the company should be doing, and they really overspent on acquisitions.
Yeah, they did that for sure. And another thing that I always feel is that it is very easy to say a certain thing, that there's a model which has worked in a certain demographic and it'll work in another demographic too. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the things that we keep doing while building products is look at adjacent users. You figure out your first persona, you do some level of product market fit there, right? You feel the business is growing profitably, it's scaling a certain way, you're acquiring users, and then you feel that maybe if I just move to another persona, which seems very similar, right, it'll work there also. But I think there are certain businesses, and education is especially one of them, which is very, very intent focused, especially in India and China, because it's a way to level up in life, right? And you acquire users, but they're not giving that kind of revenue to you, right? And their expectations, their thought process, like I'll give you a very good example. Like a lot of PMs who reach out to me, the first question that they ask me, how do I crack a PM role? It's not about how do I build depth, how do I do better discovery, asking questions on how do I look at culture in a very, very meaningful way. So the volume of questions that I generally get is very outcome oriented, right? But people fail to realize that it's the process that takes you to the outcome, right? You need to be fascinated by that. So I think that was another bit which kind of lured them, because they had so much money. They felt that they'll just acquire businesses and it'll just happen. Yeah.
Yeah. The acquisition history, I think when I did my MBA, they said something like 75% of acquisitions actually fail. But somehow, once businesses get a lot of cash in their pockets, they just start spending.
And I think that is so true in a general structure, because there is some thesis that you build. Because, for example, I'll tell you, like if I start doing ads on product management and saying that my program is the best program in the world, right? But you fail to realize that there is an interest, because that outcome is very alluring, right? You become a PM, you become a builder, you're someone who's looked up in the org, right? You're designing strategic decisions, you're starting to move towards how do you optimize funnels, and majorly you're responsible for the end user's experience, right? But the thing is, in order to reach there, right, not everybody comes with the same intent. They have not done their discovery, that what the role truly entails, right? And that is something where people fail to realize. And that's why they have to put like salespeople in between to do that conversation for them. And that is another cost. Like another node into the system is another cost, right? And as you move out, because the intent was not there, and building intent is hard. Like we'll talk more about the community ecosystem that especially people try to build, but building intent is hard. And when that outcome doesn't hit, the first thing the customer says is, give me back my money. I came here for a certain reason, right? And that's the harsh reality. Yeah.
And in product management in particular, I'm not sure everybody is actually cut out to be a product manager, right? You had to have been a high performer for most of your life. You had to have been coming in the top 10 percentile, not just in intelligence, but also EQ and emotional intelligence.
And that is so true, because one of the things that people should realize over time is that your output as a entry-level PM might be anchored on what are the soft skills that you bring, the hard skills that you bring to the table. Maybe writing a good PRD, maybe doing better design thinking, maybe have better attention to detail. But over time, it is the function of what your team does. So one of my managers, who currently is the CMO of a billion-dollar company, he talks about that product managers have to make do with not what they have got, but what they make of what they have got. Right? And that's a very powerful thing to say. So that is something that people have to understand, that it is deeply rooted in the principles that you bring across. How do you conduct yourself? Right? How do you go into a conversation and make the other person comfortable enough to tell you their need? Right? Because a lot of times if you go to the customer, the only thing that they'll do, they'll regurgitate the want. That this is what I want a G-Wagon. I want a Mercedes, right? Something like that. But it is that ambience, it is that persona that you develop. Like one of the things that people call me very fondly is Bhaiya, right? That you have kind of heard also across, right? The sheer reason is that I don't want them to see me as an influencer or somebody who was a director of product somewhere or somebody who built a company. I want that closeness with my customer or with my student, that they can tell me this is what is happening in my life, right? And then you kind of build actionable insights out of there. Like one of the things that I keep saying, and this is something that I've more recently kind of got driven in this book written by Daniel Pink. It's called Drive. He says that insights come from observations, but not all observations are insights, right? But every insight stems from an observation. So we're talking today, we want to probably talk a little deeper about that, how people think, right? And that's a very funny thing. So product managers, how do I put it, are paid for insights per minute, right? However ambiguous it might sound. Yeah.
Yes. And when push comes to shove, as a product manager, even if you are delivering the features that executives hand you and people like you, if the executives can't say, Because of Akash, these three positive things happened that wouldn't have happened if Akash weren't here. You're liable to let go. It's been really brutal with how many PMs have been getting laid off in India, the United States, Europe. It's been a global phenomenon.
And that's so true, because see, there's this interesting story that I always keep telling my students, is that there's this very interesting anecdote where people say that all plans fail when you essentially go on the ground, right? And we PMs are like always so rooted on structured thinking, that how do you structure problems, but to what end, right? And there's this nice thing that once again Simon Sinek once said, that there's something called commander's intent. Intent has to be ambiguous, right? He says that when you go in a battle, right, you'll probably say that I want to break the will of the other person in the southeast region. Now that's very vague, but it has to be vague, right? Similarly, for a product manager, I think that intent matters a lot, because you have to navigate those structures to make that happen, right? However vague it might sound. It might be as simple as that improve the morale of our customers, and which maybe drives retention in some way, right? And that is something which people have to understand, that it's not about a certain job that you have to kind of do, or a certain task that you have to do. If you have to move the core business metric, there's everything that comes with it, right? And that everything means everything, literally means everything. It means doing customer success, doing sales, going into a meeting, giving a strategic narrative, building a roadmap, whatever the damn hell it takes, you have to get that done. And that attitude is generally rare, because people are like, how I keep saying that ambiguity is not something that people generally like, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they think that if they check the boxes on the PRDs and on the 360 feedback, it should be good. But the reality isn't the case. And what I want to double click on is, I have encountered a lot of PMs in Bangalore, where you are, who were laid off maybe 1 to 2 years ago, and they haven't found a job yet. What is going on?
Sure. So I think there are two aspects that I always keep speaking about, right? The first thing is that in capital markets also follow a cycle, right? There's a short-term cycle and there's a long-term cycle. In general, in the long term, if you look at like 3 decades or 4 decades, the funding, the investment into new areas, cybersecurity, maybe EVs, maybe internet in general, has gone up. But those cycles are very remnant. They are like 7-year, 6-year cycles where funding will go up, then it'll go down, then it'll go up, right? In most cases, when there are a lot of funds in the market, right, people generally have an understanding that, oh, I'll hire a product manager with a certain kind of attributes. Somebody's sharp, articulative, has attention to detail, and over time I'll figure out what's the value that they will add into the ecosystem. Maybe like it'll take 6 months for them to really establish them into the company and start adding value there, right? That doesn't happen in funding out cycles, right? It is somebody that you want that has those acumens today, right? So a lot of people, what they essentially understood, that there's a process, there's a method to the madness. Maybe there are 3-4 types of interviews that really happen, right? Maybe something on product sense, maybe on analytics to a certain level, maybe a behavioral interview. And they keep prepping about that without kind of going deeper in why that question is asked. What's the context in the other person's mind? And once that pattern fails, you're generally not considered good enough to essentially lead pivotal decisions in the company, because you already don't have funds as a founder, right? So that's a choice that you have to make, that I want a really, really good person. And that's exactly what's happening, because this role is super glorified. Everybody looks up to this person and they feel that there's just these 5-6 levers that you have to do. Like, I generally keep saying this, that around 4 years back, 5 years back, I was the first person, or probably one of the first few PMs in India who talked about building a portfolio, right? But again, what's happening today, 5 years down the line, it's the same damn case study, which is regurgitated at every place with no depth to it, right? I keep telling people, how do you build a portfolio in 8 weeks, bro? In any program, in anything that you do, right? It took me 10 years to essentially build that across, right? So the only thing that one of the things that people keep lacking and not cracking these interviews and is the sheer fact that you have to deal with ambiguity and deal with intent, right? That if you essentially give an interview and you fail, do you have the retrospection ability to go back and start thinking, where is my competency gap? And what is the ideal competency they're looking at? That path is in most cases not clear, and whatever they hear in sheer frequency on the internet, oh, you do this, oh, you do that, oh, if you understand system design well, right? That makes just sense for them, and then they say, oh wow, I've applied somewhere, nobody's responding, or the interviews are not going as well. It is the sheer fact that you go down inside yourself and say that a problem leads to skills. Skills don't lead to a problem. You essentially go inside, understand how the system works, and then essentially decide, oh, design is where I want to really improve, or engineering is where something I really want to do well. I think that intent, that discovery of thought has gone for a toss, right? And because so many people got enamored because of the previous cycles that PM is such an amazing role, everybody wanted to jump in, right? And now they're miserably failing, right? And that is when I keep speaking in my videos that first try to understand what do you want to do this. What makes a problem solver a good problem solver? Ask questions on how do I think? How do I do better over there? And if you improve that depth, then the skills will follow, right? That is sheerly lacking in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one component on the job seeker side. I think there's probably also a component around the hiring side where Indian tech startup founders almost beefed up their PM teams too much. And it seems like, based on the data, it's like specifically in Bangalore, it seems like there was just too much of a hype cycle in 2021, 2022.
Absolutely. I think because of it was just sheer about the fact that the funds raised, right? Because people felt that the easiest way is to just hire people and put them into a central role and things will happen. Like, I'll give you a very good example. One of the very good local content startup in the country, which is $1 billion company, they had like a 50-member PM team. And I was like, wow, why do they need 50 PMs, right? And this was amazing to me. And the funny part is that at most places, it was all about, because they were so beefed up with funds, some moonshot project, no commercial viability around it, no PMF around it, and you put somebody sharp from an IIT or an IIM saying, solve this, and you're a PM, right? And even if that doesn't happen, you have so much money that you really don't care for 6, 8 months, 9 months. And when the investors come to you and they start telling you, no, this does not make sense. We will not give you more funds. You cannot beef this. You cannot continue this. That is the first fact that they remove. Right? That we tried this, and that is why people find it very lucrative, because whenever they go into this ecosystem and they talk about, oh wow, I'm working on this very cool AI-driven, blockchain-enabled product, right? It sounds very cool. It sounds very amazing, right? But I think people have to see the ground reality, that what is the impact I'm trying to, and most PMs generally fail to articulate what they've done over time, right? What is the one problem that really stood out? Right? And they actually built something which so many users are using. So I think that is a very, very strong indicator that hiring is a function of where you see you're placed as a founder, right? And they think that hiring more people typically fixes the problem, but it is the growth of talent within the org, which at most places does the trick. Yeah.
Okay. And of people out there, you probably work with the most aspiring PMs from these IITs and IIMs. What's your sense of the market today? Has it picked up from the last year where it was really bad? Has AI helped buoy the amount of roles? What is it looking like on the ground right now?
I think the market is improving now. I think a lot of my students have recently moved into PM roles, especially consumer roles. And that is currently happening. The sheer reason, because I think the narrative has moved from growing at all costs to more profitability. Founders have pivoted a lot. They've understood the role in slightly more detail and understanding that what is the value that, and I think there are clearer KPIs which I can see nowadays. So they are like kind of very clear about that what are the variables that they look into a person to essentially become a good PM. And that has been happening because it is the ecosystem shift that is happening. Probably for the next 2-3 years, any of the VC firms that I talk, like Matrix, Nexus Venture Partners, all of the people are essentially moving towards how do you build a very kind of, that's the word that they use, a zombie business, which keeps generating cash flows, right? And I think there is where a lot of hiring is actually happening. It's opening up. But once again, I think the core thinking that today also is there is not a lot of clarity about what the role entails. I think that might be slightly different. What do you think? Is it very different in the West when people look at hiring PMs, right?
I don't think so. So I think there's this narrative out there that like India is on some totally different track for product management. But I would argue that the track India is on is very similar to all of the second tier cities in the US. So basically, if you're not in Silicon Valley, but if you're in Seattle or New York, you're living the same life that a PM in Bangalore is living, which is like you hear these best practices coming out of Silicon Valley and they make you seem like you're inadequate because you're a feature factory or you're not empowered or who knows what. But in reality, that's like how product management is majorly practiced in your city and area, and it's totally fine. And so I feel like the places where it's furthest away is actually industry, and it's the same in India and in the United States. So if you look at industry-wise, your pure tech companies, your Razor Pays of the world, they do understand the product management role really, really well. Similarly, a Google here in the US, they really understand the product management role. Same with Flipkart in India. All of the best tech companies, they actually have a good product management practice too. When you go talk to Razorpay PMs, you say, oh, was your roadmap handed to you? No, it wasn't handed to me. Like I did problem discovery and I helped to drive it with my empowered designers. And so I think that actually it's the same trends. And I think Indians and Americans tend to like similar content. So they all consume the same content. So if you look at, Lenny's podcast or this newsletter and this podcast, like India and US, those are the big places. Europe is almost, they have like a different practice and different way of saying things. Americans and Indians were brash, we're direct. And so I would agree 100% that because founders are now becoming more profitability focused and there's more awareness about, well, hey, product managers, they need to be able to drive output metrics. They need to have a ROI. They're leading a team that in the US usually costs about 2 million USD per year. They need to drive 2 million USD also. And so I think that the market is turning around for the better, especially because of AI. And AI in the US has just gone crazy. And everybody I talk to these days, if they're landing a role, it's in AI.
And that is so true, because one of the things that one of my old managers, he always used to say things that if everybody would do interesting things, who will do the boring things? I kind of don't agree there, because the thing is that the boring stuff where you have to give attention to detail or maybe write a better PRD or maybe set an agenda for a meeting or maybe drive some kind of strategic narrative, I think a lot is helpful through AI. I leverage GPT a lot in my content, in the way I teach, in the way I have to circumvent certain problems or certain things, right? So it gives me a lot of time to focus on the deep stuff that I have to do, which is probably read some new thing, maybe understand system dynamics well, and maybe explain a concept. And I think that's a super, super powerful thing. And over time, as AI is improving, I was recently using GPT for having conversations. I was having like moralistic conversations with GPT, and that was so fun, like coming from that side. And so I think it really, really is empowering to the people who show intent. Again, and intent is generally in action. That do you have something to show your proof of work? One of the things that since you talked about, and you also talked about the fact that people are not getting roles because it is the mindset of the funnel that I keep saying that, oh, I'll apply to 100 places, 20 will call me, out of those 10, I'll give an interview to, and the 2 others will probably give me an offer and I'll join somewhere, right? Then where is your intent? That where do you want to go, right? It's what happened through the market. And I think the other way around of building distribution, building a brand, is more about building proof of work, right? That tomorrow I go into a conversation, we both are talking to each other because we have interacted with some kind of proof of work for each other. right? That's why this conversation is happening. And I think that speaks a lot about your intent, your ability to drive outcomes, because nobody's stopping you. Like I keep giving this example to a lot of my students, is that they keep asking me, how do you get so many followers or whatever on social media? I say, can you write for 1,000 days straight? Can you do that? If you can do that, it's as easy as that. Yeah.
So now I want to get into some more tactical steps for these job seekers. And we've danced around it. We even mentioned IIM. You know, if you're an aspiring PM, is an MBA a good path to getting in?
Sure. So I think it's a very frequent question that people, and I did a video on my channel also, that do you want to kind of do an MBA? See, I think it's all about experiences. What do you want? Like the first question that you asked me, right? What do you want to drive from this, for any experience that you want to do, right? A lot of people think that it's some kind of a shortcut, but they never ask this question, why is it a shortcut to essentially move to the PM roles? Because just by sheer statistical numbers, ISB, which is one of the premium schools in the country, kind of has like 30% of their openings, or 25-30% of their openings are PM roles, right? It used to be more consulting roles maybe like 10 years back, right? Where 80% of those roles were consulting, banking, and things like that. So we need to ask this question slightly more deeply and ask that, why does it work, right? The sheer reason it works is because of threefold, right? One, you have really good peers, right? Whenever you're doing a case, you're getting divergent views, right? Which are generally not visible on the internet. When you're reading somewhere, you don't really know how Akash thinks, how Shravan thinks. And because there is a certain kind of filtration criteria to each of these schools, you know that the view is coming from someone with a certain amount of credibility or certain amount of proof of work that they've done in their lives. That's one. I think the second reason is that you consistently do a lot of cases which are like real life problems, that you pick up the case of Amul and say, how did it scale as a cooperative, right? Now there you have to think about tons and tons of variables, that what was their model, what was the branding structure, how did they position it to the customer, what was the value prop, was it clear enough, right? So you're able to see a problem from a system lens. I think that's the second thing. And the third thing is obviously the network, right? An MBA school enables you to reach out to someone who's already a PM, probably at Google, right? I think these three things, when people do understand that these are the three tenets that why an MBA generally works to help you to a PM role. But is it the title of an MBA or the degree that really helps you move there? Or is it the experience on these three tenets that really makes you capable to do that, right? And I keep telling people that if you're able to build these three tenets by yourself, right, you don't have to do an MBA, right? Do an MBA for the experience to grow as a human. Like Naval Ravikant always keeps saying that specialization is for insects, right? You need to grow like as a generalist. And when I say, how are you a good generalist, right? People say doing multiple things at a time is probably becoming a good generalist. But I say no. Probably there's one thing that you're really good at and you're probably in the top 1%. But even in the remaining things, you have to be in the top 10%. That's how then you're a really good generalist. Then you can say that in juggle, right? And that experience, if it shapes you as a human in your human values, I think you automatically become somebody who is looked up to, who is a leader, and that really leads to that outcome, right? So simple answer, not to revolve around the same thing. If you really want to improve in the human qualities which make you a really good leader, the ability to kind of solve problems analytically, build attention to detail, MBA is a great thing to do. Right? It's the kind of network that you would aspire to do that. But if you're doing it just for cracking a PM role, I don't think it justifies like spending 2 years in a school when you're not really clear why you want to be there. Yeah.
Yeah. And the cost component that I think people don't realize is, of course, you aren't earning and you aren't growing in your current career. But I think that one reason potentially that an MBA could be good, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is getting a good brand.
Yeah.
Because I find that, like, if you look at a top company, Google, Flipkart, they only want to hire from IIM, ISB, or IIT. So if you have the IIT, it feels like maybe it's overkill because they would already look at you. But if you don't have that top tier undergrad, then it feels like if you can break into a top tier MBA, a Stanford, a Harvard, it actually does make sense to get that brand just so that they'll talk to you.
Absolutely. I think it comes down to the proof of work. What does IIT tell you? That out of a million people, you were in the top 5,000. So by design, I expect you to be smart, right? You can solve mathematical problems fast. You can look at elements of nodes of a system in a physical way, in a better principalic way, right? And similar is with IIM, right? You're competing against a very high competition audience with a lot of effort, people putting across in years and years, and it gives you that sense that, oh, talking to this person might be more valuable to me. But the divergent point that I want to put across is, it is again a very strong function of how do you put across what you have learned to the world. You might be the best person, and people have a very poor opinion on what they think they know or what actually they know, right? That gap, that image that people look at themselves is not the real image in most cases, right? So if you are able to build that kind of a proof of work, right, and showcase that across, maybe on social media, maybe just put across how do you write, is there a way going to read some long form content that is super valuable for you. It is going to take you those 2 years for the right kind of people to see you, right? It's the same time spent. Only thing is that now that you've given $100,000 to a school like Stanford or some other school, you are you're extrinsically motivated to put that effort to become the valedictorian or to top the batch, because you know that there's a loan on my head. But so I keep saying this, that why do people say that there's this funny moniker that people say generally, at least in the last 20 years, 25 years in India, that if you're an entrepreneur, you're actually unemployed. So that's what people say. The reason is because people, again, hate ambiguity. If you wake up in the morning and you don't have a structure, what do I have to do in the day, right? It's hard. It's hard. You would say that, oh, how do I prioritize my tasks? But when you go to a school or go to a company or something, right? You know that I have to wake up. These are my KPIs. This is what I do. And this is how my day ends. And you feel that I've done something in the day. But if you have nothing to do, and it is that intrinsic drive that has to push you, I don't think a lot of people have that. So that's the real reason that MBA schools kind of function that way. You have to, it's the one place where money can buy you that experience, right? Yeah.
Money can buy you that discipline. Another place you could spend money is PM courses, PM certificates. What's your take on those?
See, I think it depends. So I run a PM program, obviously, right? So one of the things that I keep thinking is that what is my way of looking at people who come in? One of the things that I keep saying is that you can't make incompetent people competent. That doesn't happen. You can make competent people excellent, right? And generally then people ask me the second question, where does competence reside? Does it reside in talent? Does it reside in the sheer compute that you have in your brain, right? I think a lot of it is dependent on intent. Can you really work hard? Like I keep saying this, that no extraordinary problem was solved through ordinary intent, right? And what does that really mean? That means that you get up, and if you really want to learn something, even if it's at Saturday, Sunday, can you just let go of going out with your friends and go to office and say, no, I want to learn this. I want to really do this because it makes me a better operator. It makes me, and if that is what comes in, right, then it's very easy to shape deeper principles in PM courses, right? If you're not coming with that intent, if you think that it's a hack, like some program which will teach me like, oh, this is analytics, this is design, this is tech, this is probably art of problem solving, doesn't help. Education has to be transformative, right? And the first article in the HBR 30, it's a compilation of like 30 best articles by Harvard Business Review. The first article by Peter Drucker is not how to build a team. It's not how to build a product. It's not like how to start a company. The first article is how do you manage oneself? And that's such a powerful thing to say, that if you can build that intrinsic discipline, then a PM course will be super, super valuable for you. And that is why you would see that majority of like, if you look at Shreyas's program, he specifically mentions that I want SPMs, GPMs, and a certain kind of background, because he knows that if he talks about deep content, depth of content, right, it is something that people would appreciate. But if I do the same thing and build like super deep content for somebody who's just out of college, who probably doesn't understand, like basically what building takes, why humility is important, it's very hard to tell that person that this program will do anything for you, because the only thing that the person is looking at, oh, can you give me like functional ways to crack the role and get into the role? But you don't just have to get into the role. You don't have to be a PM on title. You have to be an exceptional builder. You have to be a good product manager, and good product manager comes with a lot of variables which are outside your skill set. It's the culture, it's the people that you choose across, it's your general decision making, it's your drive that does that. And that is why I feel that programs which heavily focus on this layer of metacognition, right, that how to think, how do you generally make good choices in life, right, and wisdom is just good judgment, right, in every walk of life, right, and how, if there is a way that your intent can be translated there, then success is apparent. It might not happen in 2 months, it might happen in 6, but it will happen. But if that drive is not there, if that intrinsic intent is not there, and it's the allure of the outcome, that's what's pushing you into a PM course, then you're doing the wrong thing. And I think 95% of the places, it's that scenario that people come in because they feel, oh wow, I'll become a PM at Google or Razorpay and I'll get like 40 lakh rupees, right? That's an amazing thing, right? Maybe this 1 lakh rupee course is going to help me there. Just people should take a step back and ask themselves that if I can guarantee that outcome, why am I charging you 1 lakh rupees? Why would I not charge you $15,000 for it? Right? Makes sense. Yeah.
All right. So how technical should aspiring PMs become? I think I've started to say, like, if you're in high school and you're talking to me, like, go get a CS degree. And I've started to say, even like, if you're trying to transition from like, customer support or something, go get some sort of CS coding boot camp or master's in computer science. But I don't know if everybody agrees. There are a lot of people who say, oh, PM shouldn't be that technical. What's your take?
So again, it really depends on the use case, right? I'll give you an example. What does tech enable for you? It helps you enable to move from the discovery stage to build out a shippable product, or at least the understanding of a shippable product, that this is what I built across, right? So if you do have a technical background, it's a great thing. You'll have better report for engineers, right? They will better understand. You will be able to better empathize with their complexities, right? Which generally consumer PMs fail to do, right? They'll just come in and say, oh, it's just moving this element on front-end code. Why is it taking so much time? Why is it doing so? I think one of the things that I personally feel is that a PM should be, how do I coin it, be knowledge fluent. What I mean by knowledge fluent is like, look at like various aspects of the competency graph of a PM. And do you have enough fluency to talk with 90% of those people? Right? If you have that kind of fluency, I don't think you have to really go inside and understand how does the system design architecture really work, or how does a load balancer work, right? What algorithms shape it, right? That's probably a specialization. But at least from an architectural point of view, right? If you're able to understand why somebody is suggesting this kind of complexity or this kind of a product, that's an amazing thing to have. And again, from consumer side, at most places which are like very obvious products, like if you want to make a transportation product, which you're not working on some backend algorithm on how pricing is dictated, if you're working on the consumer side of things, again, not very relevant, because people would say that there are better engineers who can take care of that, right? But if you really want to become very good generalists, I think there should be some sense of how systems work, right? And you need to build some sense of that, right? And that's a good thing. So that's why I take kind of a step back and I say that the better thing to do is to understand tech from a nodal point of view, that how does an API work, but do understand and take a step back and say, how does the system in totality work? Right? What are the components in the system? What are the relationships between the nodes? What's the purpose of the system? If you can define that well in a diagrammatic way, I think it'll give you a lot of leverage as a PM. So the simple answer to this is become fluent. At least know what, so that I can hold a conversation with you. And it can so happen it with the basics of things, that what's an API, how does the internet work, how does basically LLMs work. And if you have that sense and you're able to articulate that in like a structural conversation with your engineering manager or your engineering lead, I think that's a good place to be in. So, but yeah, don't anchor too much. You don't need to have like a 4-year degree where you're kind of learning algorithms and machine learning to essentially become successful in a PM role. Yeah.
I love it. So once you've assembled the right set of experiences, you need to package yourself. And we're now returning to content that's relevant for experienced PMs as well. You need to create a great resume. And I think people underrate the resume, to be honest, for two reasons, right? Number one, it is not just about getting you the interview. It is actually also usually the first thing people open when they interview you. You know, everybody's running late. They're just 2 minutes before the interview. They pull up your resume and they quickly scan it, and then they talk to you. So it's actually your first impression for every interviewer to go get an offer, right? So that's number one. And number two is I find that the process of creating a good resume helps you identify the right stories to bring up for a particular job. So can you talk to me a little bit about your take on resumes? How should a PM be creating a resume to really stand out? Because in this market, every job has 600, 1,000 applications.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it has 2-3 tenets, and as you rightly said, it's the smallest of things which essentially can be deal breakers while you look at a resume. Like, I'll give you a very good classic example of that, and I keep asking this, that there are 2 pages, both are selling courses. At one place in a button you write buy now, another place you write enroll now. You'll see a significant difference there on how people perceive it, right? In one place you will have probably a deeper funnel because people would want to know that what is that experience that's entailing me. The other place it seems like a transaction, right? I think people give very little importance to the kind of words that they use, right, on a resume, right? And one of the things that a resume is reflective of is that maybe in the next 10 minutes, can I know something interesting about this person? What stands out, right? And I think a lot of times when people write resumes, the first mistake that they do is they think jargons really help you move across to really good places, right? Somebody at Google that, oh, if you write something like I'm a visionary founder, worked on probably 100 million products and something like that, that seems very nice that, oh, I led orthogonal growth and stuff like that, right? But I think one of the underrated things in PM resumes is clarity. What did you do, right? Why was the problem relevant, right? How did you solve it, right? If that is the narrative that I can understand in like 5 minutes, oh wow, that's an amazing thing. And another bit that I keep talking about is, see, one of the things that I always feel is that you as a person, if you're making your resume, right, you should be somehow known before you really enter the interview, right? Oh, I've seen this guy somewhere. I've read some of his content or something on those lines, right? So I think one of the things that people have to realize is that the necessity of creating public thought processes on the internet is a necessity now, right? A resume does not tell me how Akash Gupta thinks. It only tells me interesting points about him. Oh, this might be a very good interesting point that I want to talk about, right? But what tells me the depth is probably some kind of proof of work which is tied to your resume, right? So I'll give you a very, very, very simple, actionable example. If you have a very active LinkedIn and the first thing that you say that, oh, wow, this is, and the link that the first thing, more often than not, maybe in 20 resumes that you're looking at, if you click on the link and you see really, really good quality content, you would come back and spend like 30 more seconds on that resume and say, oh, wow, this is how the person thinks. And now I want to know more about this person, right? Another thing is that I always say this, that there should be some conversation starters, right? It's like dating, that what is that one point that really looks special to us? Like for me, it is like, oh, I was a bug bounty hunter. Oh, you were that guy who got like $5,000 through Uber by finding that bug. Now that's an interesting thing to talk about, right? That's something that will hook the person. And that is what should really, really come out from your resume, right? And the third thing, which I think people really, really underrate, is that they don't really know how to kind of assess them on skills. Right? For example, a job opening is telling you that you need to be good at design. How do you really rate yourself on design? Right? Do you rate yourself 8 out of 10? Do you really rate yourself 9 out of 10? And how do you actionably do that? Is there something that you've tied across? Maybe a link to some kind of a design assignment that you put across and the person clicks and it opens up a PDF or something like that. Oh, this is what you've done. Right? So I think your resume is something like a highlight corner.
One thing you said there about content, I want to double click on because I might have a slightly differing view on that. There's 2 things around content that I get worried about when I hear that advice. So the first is that if you look at PM content creators as a whole, once they become content creators, they're career stints like decrease in time. Like it seems to not help people in their career. The second is that I think that some people just aren't building good content once they hear this advice. And I was talking to a Meta hiring manager recently, and he was like, yeah, most of the people's content who I find, it makes me think less of them. Because if they've made it to talking to me, I assume that they're like super smart, great writers. And then I go check out their content and I'm like, wait, this isn't well written. I wouldn't want them to write a PRD on my team. How should people think about creating content at the right quality bar?
Sure. So I think very, very, very good question. So this is something that I really recently, I was reading this report on creator economy, and the director of YouTube creator experiences, he kind of reposted that across. And this is something that you are exactly saying what kind of I was also saying. So a lot of times people ask that why do creators end up not being able to monetize their audience to the extent that they want? Right? Because there are two aspects to essentially building monetizable audiences, or for that matter, the first is something called credibility. What have you done? And the second is the voice that it essentially reaches about. Most content is written in a way where it gives you more engagement, not necessarily more depth. Right? It sounds very interesting. Like, if I tell you a very interesting story about some person doing some strange experiment somewhere, you might remember it. But if I say something which is like super, super boring, that this is the kind of product, the algorithm that I use, you'll forget it tomorrow, right? It's not something that you'll remember. So I think there are two types of things that I do, especially as a PM. So in order to build that influence and credibility, there are two types of content. One is something that I want to write. That's the narrative that I want to put across. That this is how I look at a product, right? This is my thinking about how Swiggy should ship out its next probably $100 million bet, right? That's my view of looking at it. Or what is my breakdown of how Netflix works, or why their ad model would work. And then the second kind of content is, how do I put it, is more like visibility content, which people want to read, because not necessarily everybody who's searching would have the same amount of depth. You want to reach a certain kind of audience. So that is the reason that I started writing content. I said that, okay, right, maybe 60% of my content is purely memes, fun and stuff like that, right? But there is 40% content. Like if you spend time on my content, you will find certain things and X number of things of value, right? One of the very similar reasons of I use a lot of funny content on LinkedIn is because I have a YouTube channel, and you can always go there and see the kind of depth that I bring across in my discussions. So at that point, you would not find that Shravan is not a deep guy, or that person is not a deep guy. You would say that's maybe his persona. Maybe it's working for me or not. So I think that balance you have to establish very well, right? Like if you just keep writing about why is an MBA good for it or not, or for them to how do I essentially learn about design principles, which everybody is writing, I don't think there is any differentiator over there, right? You have to start thinking that, oh, this is an area that I really like. Maybe I write about it, but in order to bring the right traffic towards it, I might have to also diversify my content in such a way that it brings them to that page. And then they essentially go across and see the top 3-4 featured posts that you have done. Oh, wow, this is great. Like one of the things that people have always told me is that from your LinkedIn, we go to your YouTube or we go to your Medium and see, oh, wow, this person has written long form content. He has talked about deeper stuff in life. And that is how your discovery happens. The problem is that if you as an early stage PM or a mid stage PM, right, say that today I want to start writing content and I want to put that across, it's very hard for people to discover it. Right? And even if you put that in your resume out of the 600 odd applications that you're getting, how do I figure out that the content that you have written across is really good and not the other 50 articles that I see on the different types of resumes? So there has to be a balance of distribution and quality, right? And that balance you have to strike across. That am I just talking about funny stuff all the time? Or am I also talking about variance in the content that I bring across? Right? And that shows that it also shows that you have horizontal depth. You can talk about humor, you can talk about probably analytics, you can talk about maybe scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita to a certain level, and then you also talk about system dynamics at a certain level. And that is what seems enterprise. Again, another novel quote, right? He says that, so it was in the Lex Friedman podcast, he says that a monkey driving a tricycle is very interesting. Then a monkey reading a book is again very interesting. A person reading a book on a tricycle with a monkey in its hand is even more interesting. So what I mean by that is that a person from who is a product manager who is certainly thought in a certain way, right? This is how they will think. This is the background and when they have a deep divergent view about something else, that is, I think, also a very interesting thing where which people want to see. A lot of people reach out not only for product principles, they also reach out about how education or community building has to be done in a certain way. Right? And that is a very good anchor point for me, because as D2C businesses come to me, they say, we need your skill set of building a community. Can you help us across? How do you do that? Right? So I think I do agree in what you're saying, but I think there has to be a balance, and that balance you have to figure out for yourself. Yeah.
Okay. So the resume and content, these are two ways to get interviews. I'm not sure if they're actually the best. There's so many other ways. Like, you can build work products, you can cold outbound email, you can get referrals, you can generate inbound by optimizing your LinkedIn for keywords. You can just go out and network. You can go to PM Mixers, you can go to Lenny and Shravan and Akash's Mixers, and you can go find leaders. So there's a million ways to actually get interviews. I think people don't realize that. How would you kind of rank them? Like, from top to bottom, where should people be focusing?
The first thing that you should do is that, again, which is very, very obvious, the low-hanging fruits. Make a very good LinkedIn profile. Make it easy to understand. Bring clarity there. Bring clarity in your experiences. More words don't necessarily mean depth, right? So choose your words wisely, right? And what do you want to convey? That narrative has to be clear. I think the second thing that you have to do is show some intrinsic intent. A lot of people, again, this is a statistical example from all social media platforms. Maybe 90% or 95% of the people just consume content. They don't do anything with it. And right, and that sheer time when they want to do something with it is the time when they need something, right? I want a job. I want a referral. I want to do something like that. So I think another thing is that do your discovery, right? Probably reach out to thought leaders in the space, and don't necessarily go out to, a lot of people just reach out to me, Shravan, can I get your mentorship? I don't know you, bro. I don't understand who you are, right? Why would I do that for you, right? So probably get an understanding of that person on the internet and talk contextual things that, oh, I did understand this is the kind of work that you've done. Like Akash worked at Epic Games, right? I would want to talk about something on games, that this is what I like. Build some interesting narrative in the reach out that you're doing, right? And their success rates will double, triple very easily, because nobody wants to do a conversation where he wants to listen to you telling about your problems. They want to listen to about what is interesting for them in that conversation, right? It is the one thing, probably after this podcast, you would say, oh, Shravan is that funny guy who puts memes on LinkedIn, right? Now that's an interesting thing to have. You will remember me for that. So I think that is another thing that people generally, and I think one more very interesting thing is the PM mixers that you talked about, networking events. If you're in cities like Bangalore, SF, London, Dubai, and some places across the globe where there is generally tech-enabled audiences, right? You should go out to mixers. I think one of the things that people generally don't feel comfortable with is putting them out there. It is generally a function of your locus of identity, right? The people that I've generally seen making those shifts are the people who don't care for opinions a lot, right? They take just actionable bits. So a very close friend of mine who was the head of product for Blackbuck, he then was the head of engineering for a lot of Sequoia companies, right? And he used to say this very interesting thing, and he used to always say that opinions are trivial, feedback is not. Right? Now that's a very interesting thing to say. Opinions are generally people-driven opinions, that I think you're like this. I think, Akash, you are good at this, right? Feedback is generally put into two categories, actionable or not actionable. Right? It's not good or bad. It's just actionable or not actionable. So take that, and that can only happen when you go out of your comfort zone and actually go out to a mixer and talk to somebody, right? That this is what I think. Am I right? Am I not right? And I think the most underrated one is that building a product in itself. I'll give you a very good example of that. So one of my students, he used to work for this college called VIT, and it's a tier 2 college in India, slightly premium, right? But not as reputed as IITs and BITS Pilani and other colleges. So he just took my LinkedIn content, right? Put it in an LLM, right? Created a course out of it, put a Gumroad link on top, and just kind of started selling it. And that I'll make a personalized course for you, right? And within 3 months, he probably made $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Now, if this resume comes to me that he has actually shipped out a product and I actually see that product live, that how is it's working and it is actually making money, I think I have all the tenets of hiring this person because I know he's a builder. He took a problem. All of those things took a problem, understood the pain point, prioritized that across, put that across in a way, in a solution, got feedback for the solution, and the solution is working on its own. I think all the boxes are ticked that way. Then maybe I'll just focus on other factors. So I think networking is heavily underrated, and it is generally because then that is, again, coming back to the first point, empathy and humility, right? I would definitely not be comfortable if you would have asked me the 2015 Shravan that go and talk to a VP of product at Meta. I don't think I would have had the courage to do that, because all I thought at that point was probably I'll go there and talk, and do I sound dumb? Do I just sound like that? I think people have to get out of that zone, that if you don't invest anything, the chances are probably next to negligible, right? But if you invest, at least you have a 1% chance of making it there, right? And if you do it, and consistency as it is underrated, I've seen people going on 20 networking events in 6 months, and in the 7th month, they have a job because the sheer fact that they were part of those 20 events. Yeah. So completely agree with you. But I think, what do you think besides that? Do you think makes sense for people? If I am, a lot of times people ask me this question, I'm an introvert. It's not very easy for me to connect to people. What do I do then?
Yeah, I think it's really important to play to your strengths because there are so many options out there. The reason networking works, though, is even if you don't have the courage to go talk to the VP at Meta, you might have courage to go talk to the other aspiring PM who's at the event. And what might they be? They might be your mock interview buddy. They might be your buddy, your accountability buddy. If you're currently not employed, you can meet up with them every Friday for coffee and just have a quick chat in the morning about how things are going. So the networking events and the introversion, you need to kind of just approach the networking event from your own angle. And if you really can't do the networking event, then you need to nail another strategy. So there are other good strategies out there. For instance, I just mentioned cold emailing. So I recently profiled Tony Dos Santos in the newsletter. So what did he do with his cold email? He literally basically recreated the person's website, but it was his resume. He's putting in 10 hours of work for that one application, but then he's cold emailing the CEO, and the CEO is going to respond. I mean, you just put in 10 hours of work into this. And so, at the worst, the CEO might just say, yeah, we're looking for people with more experience, or thanks for your effort, but we're not hiring PMs right now. That's the worst case you can have, but who knows? Now they've responded to your email. Maybe 5 years later, they could be useful for you. So definitely tailor it to your style. Anything can work. Even dropping your resume, I believe, can work, but how about you do that thing I just mentioned where you have the most customized, best resume, best designed resume? Who knows? Maybe you have a designer friend. You go pay that designer friend whatever their fee is so you can A, support your friend, but then B, have a resume that stands out. So there's a million different ways to get a job, and always being on your strengths, I think, is going to help you because you're going to be passionate. You're going to go the extra mile. If you just do the bare minimum, or you think that you can get away with 1 or 2 hours of work, you're not going to stand out.
Absolutely. I think this is a very good example that you gave. So one of my students more recently, he just cracked a role at 1MG, which is again a healthcare unicorn in India. Do you know what he did? He just took one problem, did that complete PRD even before applying. He made a 22-page PRD, very well thought. And the next thing that happens, he goes into the interview and the interviewer asks the question about the very same PRD and says, oh, wow. And the entire conversation became out that PRD, and obviously out of 3,000 applicants, he cracked a role. And not only one role, he cracked 2 roles the same way. So this is a very good example that you're saying that you're spending 10, because it does 2 things. If I'm investing my time on a problem where I'm not really sure that whether I'll get that interview or not, and still showing that competent, it shows intent that you definitely. And second thing it does for you is it gives me a sense of understanding that to the interviewer, that what will this person bring on the table, right? Because it is your problem. It's the company's problem that you picked up and said that this is how I would essentially solve it. Like one of my very good friends, more recently, he was teaching this class, this PM class, and a good friend of mine, and he was telling that a lot of his students actually worked on the group ordering feature, which recently got live in Zomato and Swiggy. Right? And they gave narratives around it. And there were like 2 of his students who essentially cracked roles in Swiggy and Zomato, right? Because of the sheer fact that they thought about this problem, that group ordering is a thing. It is something that I face on everyday basis. It is a collection of people who want different things. And I cannot make like 5 orders, just ordering biryani for somebody and ice creams for the other person. And he actually built a solution around it. So that's again, function of very strong intent that I really want to be there, and what is the value that the other person will derive from this effort. If you're clear about that, I think it makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah, the trade-off you're making here is you just can't apply everywhere now. That's why intent matters, where you need to have some direction. Where do I want to work? And then I'm going to put in the extra work to get there.
I think that is a very powerful thing to say, but I don't think that is the same at most places, right? Because the thing that you're saying is something that I've been trying my level best to put that across, that if you look at your life as a funnel, right, it's not going to work out. You have to be that change maker. You have to be in that 1%. Like I asked this question in one of my classes, and I was saying this, that, okay, if I give you $100,000 a year and tell you don't ever come to office, I don't want you to come there at all. Will you essentially take that job and do it well? Do you know the astounding response? 98% of people said yes. That's okay, right? It's the 2% who say that wealth is a byproduct, or right, or essential. It is because I want to upskill myself. I want to add value at multiple places, right? And that's why I go to office every day, because I want to learn. I want to become a better person. I want to become a better thinker in general. And if that happens, then you'll automatically be able to achieve those outcomes. Those people are generally change makers. And since you're talking about spending 10 hours on your resume doing that, I think it comes from the same attitude, right? That if I really want to stand out, I have to do something which other people are not doing, right? Maybe it is being meticulous in my resume. Maybe it's just being part of certain mixers. Maybe it's trying to broker a conversation where I know it's going to be very hard to broker a conversation. Or maybe it's about building a product when I don't have money. I have maybe like $100. That's the allowance that my father gives me in college, right? And how do I build a product on top of it? This all shows that you have that ability to not let situations decide that where you want to be. Yeah.
All right. So you've gotten the interview, and I think you've talked about this in a couple different YouTube videos, but they're always going to ask you, like, tell me about yourself. So how do you nail this question in a way that actually advances your candidacy versus just, okay, he answered it and I didn't fail him?
Sure. So I think at least that's just my view of looking at it, and people might differ on this opinion. I always think a story helps, right? That if you're able to tell a story about your experience, that why did you make those choices and why were they meaningful in some types of impact that you wanted to put across. I think that shows, because what you have to do is, again, go back to the competency graph and say that, do I do good structured thinking? Am I a good storyteller, right? Do I listen well, right? Can I break down problem? And these are small functional attributes that your story should give out, right? Oh, wow. Like, for example, if you are just out of college, right? And you want to say that I want to be a PM, right? Now you don't have any experience. What do? You probably talk about your fest and say that, oh, I was the convener in the fest. We raised this much money. We did it for 25,000 people. And the event was a success in terms of the sheer brand value it created, or something on those lines, which is, again, a function, it comes that you have that leadership skill set. You have that thing. Second thing is probably I saw if you are already a PM, right? Instead of talking about the technologies that you worked on, probably talk a little bit about that, why I took that decision. Why did I essentially, like, if I just want to do an intro of myself, I would say that I'm a product manager with around 10 years of experience, but majority of my time is in education, because education is close to my heart. And the sheer reason that I spent time in education in the last 6 years, because I felt that education should be transformative. And internet allows me to enable that access across. And that's why I was always driven to those products. Now it shows that it comes with a deep ethos that this is why I want to do this, right? Then the next thing that you talk about is, okay, then probably why did we build the products in certain way? Like you say that we built Zoom for education, and give a sense of that, why did we build Zoom for education? Why can't a typical Zoom product would work? Why would you essentially want to design it? Then you talk a little bit about that. What we realized, that personalized attention is something that allows somebody to upskill better, right? What I mean by personalized attention is because a lot of times education doesn't depend on the hard skills that you learn. It is also comes from a point of soft skills. Are you motivated enough? Do you want to come back to the class? We wanted to replicate these offline experiences online. Now there is a clarity to the problem statement that this is what we want to do. And what did we achieve, right? We had a very strong retention of 60%, 80%. Now, starting from your interesting story that this is the person, and depending on what type of profile you're in, maybe if you're like a mid-stage person, you can talk about the last 3-4 years of where you're working. Because if you go beyond that, unless and until there is something super, super meaningful, you should not go beyond that, because it is something that you have to say in the next 5 minutes or next 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, which seems enterprising to the person. But if you're early stage, you can talk about general decisions of your life, which are highlighters, right? Which showcase your skills in a certain way, right? And say that this is what I wanted to do. Like, cracking, a lot of people, at least in India, write about that what rank that they got in IIT. That is again a very good indicator for them that, oh, this person would be a sharp person, right? That's what I did. So I think it's the narrative, the story, where it reflects the general competencies of the PM role in some way or the other. That should be clear. The story that this was the problem, this is why it was important, this is how I tackled it, and this is an attribute that I will possess from my personality, and I'm bringing this in front of you, right? Another thing, just I give an example. A lot of people ask me why documentation is important, and I say that that's an attribute that I say that a PM should have. And if you're talking in your intro that I built a documentation system, you need to tie it to some end. You have to say that the documentation system helped me save way more productive hours. It helped me spend time on product strategy. It helped me do better discovery, right? And that is something that has to be clear. A lot of times people really, really focus on small tangible elements with no outcome tied to it. That whether that skill is really, really visible or not. Like they would say that I know how to do wireframing, or I know how to write a PRD, right? But to what end, right? And that's what your 3-4 minutes enterprising minutes should be like. And I always keep telling my students, think of your introduction like a VC pitch, like an elevator pitch, right? You go into an elevator and say that after these 2 minutes, if you were on the other way around, right, would you have continued this conversation? Would you have said that, oh no, I want to spend now 60 more minutes with this person? If that is not enterprising enough, rework. And what are the elements that you need to, the hook, that this was the problem. Then second, why was it relevant? Then why was my decision relevant around it, and what did I do, right? And if these 4 things are typically clear in terms of 3-4 examples of your career, I think you'll be able to make a good choice. And you should always pick up your high points of examples, that this is something. And at some places, I always say that there is this thing that which typically works at some places, is that you also talk a little bit about your vulnerability, where I say that this might not be my superpower, right? And that is also, that comes from a point of honesty and integrity. Yeah.
Okay, that's something I haven't heard before. Actually, like being a little bit vulnerable. What does that sound like? And can you do it on something that's considered like a core PM skill set? Like, you know, in reality, I think a lot of PMs, you know, stakeholder management might not be their strong suit, but it's kind of tough to say something like that.
Yes. I think the reason I said that is because one of the things that people have to realize is that in order to build depth, you have to go inwards rather than outwards, right? What do you bring to the table, right? And like, this is something that I keep asking in PM interviews is a very common question is, what's your superpower? But I typically ask, what do you suck at? And this is something people are startled, right? They don't have an answer for this. That, oh wow, I haven't given it a thought. I really don't know. What do I suck at? What I'm not good at? Because this is something that a person is not expecting in an interview. This is something that and if somebody is not able to tell me that where he's bad or good, right? It tells me that the person has not really deeply introspected his own competencies well. Right? And that is why a lot of times I typically, when I talk about that this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm good at, I also sometimes say this is probably not the best place for me to be. This is not, so because it also comes to the fact that before the interview, right, the person would know that this is something that he has called out, that this is probably not good at, and this competency we might have to build across over time, but at least the person knows that he's not good at, and you can make a very actionable choice then and there, right? But instead of discovering it over 5 rounds, that somebody saying that you're not good at stakeholder management because you didn't talk to the engineering manager in the engineering manager round very well, right, is something that, and it has worked wonders for a lot of people. Right? It has worked wonders. So vulnerability in that sense is a way to look inwards, right? And to say that I am also a human. I may not be good at certain things, but I know I'm not good at certain things, and it's my intent to become better there. So if this opportunity comes my way, I'll try to improve myself because at least I know where to start. A lot of people don't. Yeah. So I think that's where I was kind of talking about here. Yes.
So outside of tell me about yourself, the other area that a lot of product managers work on preparing for is the case interviews. What's your approach to kind of structuring good practice?
Cases are a very good way of breaking down abstraction into actionable parts, right? Like a problem as ambiguous as should Netflix do ads, probably, and build a model around that, right? And one of the very good ways is like people generally should follow this model that reduce the unknown unknowns in the case as much as possible. Now, as PMs, you are very comfortable with known unknowns. As long as I know the problem, well, I don't have a solution, it's okay, right? But a lot of times what happens is once you get a case, the first sense of understanding a case is, do you have the maximum width of coverage of variables which affects that problem? Right? For example, if I give you a case, Akash tells me as a PM interviewer, says, Shravan, design a 10,000 bed hospital for me. Right? Now, a simple-minded person who is not probably giving due attention to the discovery space would probably say, oh, I probably need land, a size of a building, maybe 10,000 beds at max, and that's where it works and people will start coming in, right? But probably a good PM, would first list down what are the nodes that really affect those cases. Like, for example, the fixed part. What do I need in the beginning as capital, right? Then how many beds do I need? What is this kind of space that is needed? How many doctors would be needed there? What is their commercial angle that it'll come across, right? And you essentially understand that there are tons of variables which effectively affect that case, right? Then what you do naturally next is try to understand what are the depth of those variables and do discovery in those cases. I'm not talking about the solution. I'm talking about just that, okay, if I take one part of my case is commercial viability, how will I think about it? Right? And then one part of my case is demand, how will I think about it? One part of my case is supply, how would I think about it? And then essentially break down what really affects demand. And that is when you start moving into the problem space and try to understand, oh, these are the 4 things that really affect demand, right? For example, is paying capacity something that affects demand, right? And then you break them down. Right? Once you list that structure across and you've done your discovery, then you probably try to prioritize what are those variables and what are the sub-tenets of those variables which really are meaningful to you, right? And what are those, why are they meaningful, right? If you have some sense, some logic around it, right? Like, for example, a lot of entrepreneurs come to me and they say that we probably need like $100,000 of engineering, right, to essentially ship out a product. But is that the first need? That's the question you have to ask in the case also, right? That basically, what do I need today to essentially come to a solution which is workable, which goes into the market, which gives me an understanding of that you've thought about all of those cases, right? And then if you've spent 60% of your time reducing the unknown unknowns, right, and coming to the fact that I have these 20 things that affect a case, what are the most important factors? I have prioritized them across, understood it from a consumer lens, from a problem lens, from different lenses, prioritize them across, and then pick up the 2-3 things which will essentially come out in my solution. And is there a way to measure the success of a solution? If you don't have a way to measure the success of your solution, you don't understand the journey very well. Right? You don't get that. And if you do that and then post that, you can essentially say, oh, there are some pros and cons of this solution, because every solution comes with its caveats, right? That this is what will work and this will what will not work. A lot of times people also ask me that, do I deliver like this hypothetical long form, most like visionary solution that I want to put across in a case if I break that down? But I think the better answer would be to define the solution into 2 aspects. The first aspect is what is actionable, what is broken down, what can be done today. Right? And this is a solution that I can ship out and test out very fast. And then based on that particular thesis, can I design the most futuristic solution that I think that, oh, if this works, if this hypothesis very well works, then I essentially scale it down to an AI-led. Like one of the things that people ask me that, how do you essentially build pricing for Uber? Right? And this is the case that a lot of people ask. So I tell them to just come up with the variables which affect the pricing. Right? For example, is it the road quality that affects? It is fuel optimization. Does it affect? Does it depend on traffic? Does it depend on weather and things like that? And if you are able to break that down into a way where you can come up with a heuristic around it, right? And say this heuristic is very close to what I do, and then essentially I enable other factors and make it like more advanced learning by itself, and that's the future version of it. That is something that I look forward, especially in cases, that what is the actionable solution that you bring today. And that can only happen when you do your discovery well, when you look at the problem very well, break it down, then essentially list all the variables, prioritize them better, and then essentially move to the solution space and spend like 60% of your time in the discovery part of it, so that you've removed your biases, right? And that is what I expect to somebody to do in the first 50 minutes. I think if a person really understands the problem the same way, or the gravity of the problem in a case setting of 60 minutes, and talks about 40% on aligning at the right questions to ask, right? I think the person is already through. In the remaining 20 minutes, when the person talks about solutions, they can be different. They can be built on consensus. They can be built by people who come with certain background and things like that. The bigger problem is you end up solving the problem, or you end up understanding the problem in a wrong way. And you end up giving solutions. You jump to solutions very quickly. Oh, why don't you just make a chatbot if you want to increase engagement? It's as simple as that, right? So I think that is a very important characteristics. And if you are able to do that in like a constrained setting of like 60 minutes, I think that will be reflective in your PRD also. When you have like 5 hours time or like 10 hours time to essentially do that, and say that you have a day to essentially build that PRD or build that proposal. But if it's not very evidently present in the 60 minutes I have a conversation with you, if you are not able to follow that structure across as an interviewer, I think it will be reflective in majority of the assets that you bring across, right? Because it is the structure of the conversation which shows that do you have the ability to break down a very abstract problem and break it into like smaller components, which are like more actionable. There is a certain thing that why devs hate like those kind of ambiguity, because their general work is like working on tasks. That's why whenever PMs come with a PRD, they say, doesn't mean what is the edge case here? How do I essentially handle this? How do I handle this? And if you have looked at all the edge cases, like majorly 90%, they know that the person has thought from all directions, right? And I think that is an ability that's a superpower, right? If you are able to look at different opinions, and that comes from the sheer fact that you're curious, you read a lot of stuff, you understand how the market is working, and then you are able to kind of connect the dots recursively and say that, oh, this also makes sense, this also makes sense, this also makes sense. So I think generally cases show a representation of how do you think better, how do you do discovery better, and how do you essentially minimize information gap and come to a solution which is more actionable. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Interpret. Interpret unifies all your customer interactions, from Gong calls to Zendesk tickets to Twitter threads and App Store reviews, making them available for comprehensive analysis. As we've profiled in the newsletter, it's the trusted choice of product organizations like Canva, Notion, and Descript. They rely on Interpret to drive forward their voice of customer programs. What makes Interpret special is its ability to, 1, build customer-specific AI models that provide more accurate categorization. 2, connect customer feedback directly to revenue impact so you can prioritize confidently. And 3, uncover insights with their Wisdom AI Copilot so you have an intuitive chat interface to access your data. So if you want a custom model built for your organization, get in touch with the team at interpret.com/product growth. That's ENTERPRET.com/product growth.
And what's like the best preparation strategy? You can buy like very expensive courses, you can pay for expensive coaches, you can mock interview with your friends, you can just chat with ChatGPT. There's now a million different ways to practice. What is kind of the best practice routine?
Sure. So I think for me, it really isn't that dependent on whether you have to do it in a course or not. But what you have to do is that solve some problem on a daily basis, right? I keep saying this question that never respect the person who goes to the gym like 3 hours every day for 30 days, but definitely respect that person who goes to the gym for 30 minutes for the next 3 years. So I think consistency is underrated. Right? I always keep telling people, so should we read PM articles to develop case depth? Should we look at case studies, already solved problems at exercises at websites like PM Exercises, maybe Exponent, where you're doing something on those lines, maybe Product Gym, Product Space. There are tons and tons of places, Department of Product, so many places where people have done cases, built design documents and things like that. But I think the biggest factor is that, are you doing something every day? Are you able to pick up that problem every day and come up with some narrative? And it is that consistency over 10. You will not see a stark improvement in 10 days. You might regurgitate a pattern. You might understand a pattern. But if that pattern moves from that, you'll fail again, right? But it is that hockey stick curve. Like you do it for 4 weeks, you'll start realizing there's an improvement. There is that you're able to think better. So I think the bigger moat, more than just saying that, like I keep giving these examples. There are people. So there was a student of mine who was a software engineer at Meta long back, and he just came to my YouTube channel and transitioned into Meta as a PM and then moved to Coinbase. Right? And currently is working for Coinbase, right? So the sheer reason was that whatever I was saying in my YouTube channel, he could take away and do something about it, right? He came back and I gave this public email that I used to give at that point, and he used to send me like, this is what I did, this is what I did, this is what I did, and I had nothing to, like, I never even responded. I probably responded once or twice, but he had that resilience to do it at a frequent basis. And after four months, I know he's a PM at Meta. And now when I see him like 2 years down the line, he's a senior PM at Coinbase, right? The sheer reason that he was willing to put that effort, put that across, come back and take that feedback and say, oh, I'm not good at this. I was not able to think about this variable. I was not able to prioritize better, right? Was the key, which essentially made him a good PM. Right? You can choose any path. All of those paths are equally valid, right? If you give a very good prompt to GPT, it'll make you a very good case study. It'll give you a very good question, right? A lot of my programs case studies come with the fact that I hear about an idea on Twitter, maybe on Reddit at some place, or maybe reading some book, very interesting book. And then I conversate with GPT and say, oh, if I have to solve this problem, right? Can you give me a very good representation case study around it and tell me that what would it take? Like one of the problems that we tackled was misinformation, which is a very major problem nowadays. How do you know? There is so much information that how do you know what is authentic and what is not? Right now, Twitter did a very, very like early version of community notes, but again, it is based on consensus. Right? Consensus might not be the right way to look at high quality information. It has to be fact checked in a certain way. So take up some kind of interesting idea, right? And say if there is a problem around it, use GPT leverage to give me a problem around it, and I try to break it down for you. That is one way. Second is maybe you reach out to a PM coach who essentially, because the person has been wired over taking like so many interviews and interviews and interviews and interviews. And the person knows that I can now very easily see the competencies that I require in the person. And that is why that person will be able to give you very good advice that this is what they look in Meta, this is what they look at Google, this is what they look in Stripe, right? And this is what they look at Netflix. Another friend of mine who used to work for Netflix, he used to talk a lot about their attention to detail, right? Their design philosophy. And that is a good friend of mine, Hari Krishna Menon. So, and it's like 3-4 years back. So I think a lot is rooted on how frequently do you really practice those skills and do it over a sustained period of time. Then only you will be able to see that gradual thinking change. And then a case study coming to you will be an easy thing for you to think about and say, yeah, oh, wow, I've done like 1,000 problems of it. It is the same way that people crack IIT in India, right? They practice, so much practice. But again, practice in isolation will not work. You need to get feedback, right? A lot of people also ask me, and this is a very humorous moniker in India. People say that 5 lakh students go to Kota for preparing for IIT JEE, but only 2,000 are successful. But my child, he's working 10 hours, he's studying 10 hours a day. Why didn't he get successful? Because of the sheer fact that he doesn't or she doesn't know where my competency gaps are. And that's why your cases have to be done with a peer, right? Somebody who can give a divergent view. Ki, oh no, this is not what you thought about, right? And keep that recursively, that feedback loops very strong, and they're coming, and over a period of time, you'll develop that sense. You'll develop that product sense of looking at intuitive product decisions. Why does something make sense? Why does something not make sense? It is not something, it's like wisdom. You have to go through enough examples to become that wise, right? Yeah.
I love the point around everyday thinking, because in everyday tech literature, you're not going to find how to build products. They're always on strategy and business. So most people, they really lack the ability to come up with product solutions. Even if they can do product problems, their solutions are half marketing. Their solutions aren't incremental improvements in the product. And so now I want to move over to product management craft, which is also developed only through experience. You can't really just do it. And you've done a couple different first 90 days. You've also released a video on how to do the first 90 days. So talk us through, how should a product manager handle their first 90 days?
Sure. So I think now since we are moving to the fact that now I am a product manager, like for example, I've joined a company, right? I think the first thing that people fail to realize is there are 2 kinds of values, right? There are lower values and there are higher values, right? The lower values are what you got hired for. Like, are you analytical? Right? Can you write a detailed document, right? And can you probably do you have resourcefulness as an attribute, that you can take very nimble things and make things happen? These are all good things, right? But I think there are some fundamental values, because now you are in a system where you're a node of that system and you want a certain output from that system, right? And take that system as like just a human system or a company as a system where every employee is a node. The first thing that you should understand that there are 2-3 things which will build credibility in that ecosystem for you, so that people will respect your product decisions and they'll be able to give you that value, that if you are suggesting something, it makes sense. A lot of times people, what they do, they join as a product manager, and the first thing that they do, they go into the room and they start saying that, oh, this is what we should ship out. Take a proposal to your manager and say, no, this is not done right. I see these 5 things which are broken, and let's fix those 5 things, and then just go to the team and tell them to kind of ship across. The second thing that most people do as a mistake is start anchoring a lot on skills. They start going and say, let me learn SQL. Let me learn how to wireframe better. Let me essentially know how do you write a PRD or a PPT better, right? Again, the first thing that you have to go inside a company is only do 2 things well. 1, if after the next first 3-4 weeks, if I put you in Akash's place, who is the PM, right? And that person should be able to explain the consumer journey as good as the customer is explaining. This is what I do, right? If I know at a fundamental level, why is the customer coming? What is the actual pain point, right? What am I solving for that person? Do I deeply understand that, right? And that typically happens through two actions, right? You essentially first start listening to people more, then to speak well. You don't form an opinion without doing your discovery well. So you go and talk to the engineering person, probably get a sense of that why they're shipping out a product, and give them that kind of respect that you are there to listen. You're not there to suggest solutions, right? The suggesting part comes later, right? Once you have that sense that people feel comfortable that they can sit in a room and explain their problems to you, be it engineering, be it sales, be it marketing, be it whoever you are interacting with, right? Once that comfort and trust gets built as a leader, right? Then you do one more thing. Then the next step that you do is you pick up a small problem. Not necessarily a big problem. You pick up a small problem, but say, since I'm a PM, I'll execute it end to end. It can be as simple as realigning your Jira board very early just to give more productive hours to your engineers, right? What makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Reworking your backlog in the smallest of things, right? If you do that well, and it makes some value for your team members, right? Then this is the first bit of trust that you've gained in the org, right? You pick up another project. You ship it very well. That's the second node. Third, fourth, if you do 4 or 5 small projects and all of your decisions were meaningful for the people and the customers that you essentially tried to touch, even though they might not be as meaningful as like $100 million product which some lead PM is handling, right? Doesn't matter, right? It is that path that over time which tell more, like I always keep saying that frequency is a very good indicator of product market fit. It is an indicator of credibility also. Right? That how frequently you think, oh, the last 7 decisions taken by Shravan, 6 out of them were right. And he did really well in those decisions. The next time the 8th decision comes and you come up and you say, oh, now I want this product, which is really important for me. And this is what I want to do. You have people backing you because they trust you. They know that you listen to them. They know that you always back them and you essentially be their shield in scenarios where something is not very relevant. One of the examples that I'll give you, Akash, is that when I joined Byju's, and this was a interesting role, I went in and they had never built like live class products. Most of their products were asynchronous, right? So one fine day what happens is that there is something that broke. I don't know, some feature broke or something like that where users were not able to sign up. And I was like, I panicked. Right? I panicked as a PM because I want to create that impact. And I started calling my devs like on Saturdays and saying that, why don't you fix this? Why don't you fix this? Why don't you fix this? That does not show empathy. What really happened was that on Saturday, they did fix it, but the engineering manager then told me, dude, did you gather enough context on how relevant is this problem? You are probably thinking about it, but I've seen this in the last 8 years happening 20 times, right? So it was not that important, right? And that really shook me. And I said, wow, this is really important. Why would this person now next time when I call him in the middle of the night at 2 p.m., at 2 a.m., he will pick up my call. He won't. And that is where I started to take a step back and say I would listen better. And whenever I used to go into a conversation, I first used to gather enough context for me to do my discovery well. And next time, whenever I used to come into the conversation, I did my discovery that I do understand this. And that is what slowly builds trust in the org. And that is what you should do in the first 90 days, right? That you essentially build trust and showing small pillars of success, that first project, second project, third project, small arenas where people can essentially say, wow, this is a small thing that he did. And over a period of like 8, 9, 10 weeks, maybe in the first 3 months, you reach to a point where then you are involved into the meaningful discussions that are happening in the company, that you are brought in and saying that I want your opinion also, because the 7 other decisions that you took really worked. Right? So I want your opinion also, right? That is the key, right? And again, I want to really emphasize here for all PMs who will watch this, that please understand that skills are an extension of how deeply do you understand a problem. It's not the other way around. That you start focusing on design and say that I'll figure out a problem which is focused on design. That's not how it works, right? So I think that is super critical. I think it is the softer values of a leader that you should first emanate and understand of, because your output is output of your team. If you're not shipping that out, I think it doesn't make it makes little sense. However good of a PRD you have written. Yeah.
How can PMs become better critical thinkers?
Two aspects, one from a philosophical perspective and then more from an actionability perspective, right? Because both of the things that you have to talk about. So I think critical thinking is a function of 2-3 very important things, right? One, are you genuinely curious about any interesting thing that comes your way, right? Do you step back and take a look at that thing and why this is happening a certain way, right? Why is UPI scaling? The smallest of things. Why did Swiggy give you an incognito mode? It's a food app. Why would they give you an incognito mode to hide your orders, right? Now, these are things which peculiar and curious people notice. And the second thing that I always keep telling people is there is a lot of wisdom already in the world. You don't have to find that, you just have to discover well, right? Like if you don't have that sense of reading what you like, a lot of times students come to me and say, what articles should I follow? Should I just follow Akash Gupta? Should I just follow this person? Why are you always just reading about product management? Why can't you just read about gaming? Why can't you read about astronomy, which interests you? So 50% of the time just spend on doing the things that you like, that you're just curious about, and doing that thing. That's the first thing that is super, super, super critical. The second thing is, again, you should have the ability to listen to divergent feedback. If you don't have the ability to listen to divergent feedback, there is always, see, knowledge is a function of 3 layers. There's the principalic assumptions that we make, which are called axioms, that this is how it works, right? Anything on top of it makes sense for you and you say, oh wow, that is a pillar on top of it. But any divergent feedback that comes around which does not align with your assumptions, right? At that point, you will just feel its noise. And that's why feedback in a lot of places doesn't work. Because people say that I've given enough feedback, why is somebody not improving? And that's a question people ask me in appraisals and other places, that I gave 20 times feedback. But did you break that fundamental bias that to think a certain way, that this is the culture? So the second thing that you have to is to develop the ability to listen to divergent feedback and not feel offended by it, right? Because it gives you the ability to think out of your window and say, oh, this is also another thing that I probably missed and somebody else is telling me, right? That's the second most important thing. One is being curious. Second is the ability to listen to divergent feedback. The third thing that is extremely, extremely critical as a person in order to become a critical thinker is become really, really focused on attention to detail. If you're not focused there, see, again, it's like wisdom, right? You become wise by figuring out the things between the lines. It is that wisdom that makes you better, right? And for finding those pearls of wisdom, you have to go through enough experiences and notice those experiences very well. That if you're not noticing those experiences, that it's like, for example, I keep telling people that, okay, why do you think that you talk unprofessionally to an employee in a cultural setting? Do you think it's only the two of us which are getting affected by that? It's every damn node who is seeing that conversation happen, even if it's in a room, right? And that's what culture dictates. Local actions have global impact, right? And that is the maturity that you need to kind of develop across and say that I am responsible for the consequences of my action. So if I don't value my time, then I'll definitely not go deeper into it. So I need to value my time. Whatever I'm doing with all earnestness and all honesty. And this is the best version of what I could do. And if you are putting that benchmark to yourself that if I am doing this, setting an agenda for the meeting, is it the best possible way that I could? Right? And if you keep that sense on yourself always in everything that you do, you'll be able to see small things which other people notice. Other people don't notice, because a lot of times it is all about what other people are doing around me. Like if nobody writes documentation in your organization, you will say just screw it. I'll also not write it since nobody's doing it, right? But a very good PM would know that it is for his or her improvement that he's writing documentation, right? And that will make him better, a critical thinker, that, oh, I am able to notice. And when he will write his 50th PRD and somebody will be writing his 3rd PRD, there will be glaringly obvious differences that, oh, wow, somebody could see that. So I think this is the philosophical bit that you kind of come across and say, what makes me a better human in general, what makes me a better leader in general, what makes me think deeper in general, right? Then the next part is the actionable part. Then how do you do this, right? A lot of people ask me, Shravan, why did you start writing on LinkedIn? Most people think it's the brand. Do you know what was the funny part? I used to write because back then there was a limit of 1300 characters. And I always had to write my ideas within 1300 characters. I knew that is, and that was a constraint on me, right? That was a constraint on me, that I thought about that ki, oh, now I have to not allow my depth to go down, right? Yet I have a limit of characters, right? So do that, right? Writing is a very, very, very good skill set for you to essentially become a better critical thinker. Because if I'm talking to you right now, right, I have 20 ideas in my head, right? But if I write them down and I keep doing that every day, I will be able to break them down in a structure, because it is the act that is building that muscle memory. Like there's this, there was this YouTuber which came on Lex Friedman podcast, and he says, and I think it's a very common statement, it was said by, I think, Richard Feynman long time back, that you remember 10% of what you read, right? And 20% of what you write, 30% of what you practice, and 60% of what you teach, right? So you essentially, and if you really want to become a very good critical thinker, go and teach. Right? Try to teach that concept to somebody else, right? In a way that it is very easy to understand. And if you are not able to do that, that means you haven't understood the concept very well. It's the Feynman approach, right? So these are some actionable tips that I always say. I always tell my PMs in an interview that, can you write me a one-pager? And the person says, yeah, Shravan, I can write you a one-pager. Can you do it in the next 15 minutes? Yeah, I can do that. But the constraint write it in 80 words. Not more than 80 words. I'll not read it beyond 80 words. Now that makes you think that, oh, if I write 5 more words extra, I lose my limit. So you go back and say what I want, and you strip off the other things that around that. So I think critical thinking is just a very strong personality trait that you kind of develop based on intent. That I want to first improve myself in my abilities, because as a human, you will never have that compute that you will be able to think. The system is way larger.
Critical thinking, I think, is just one of those skills that's very, very underrated. And I love your dichotomy of style versus substance. And I recommend that people think about not having too much style as a PM and having more substance as a PM, because that's how you're going to figure out, what is this customer saying that matters? What is this stakeholder saying that matters? What is my design counterpart saying that matters? Because you really need to dig to the truth if you're gonna make impact. And too many people these days, even on my teams, they'll come to me with 10% substance, and then they'll put it into an AI and it'll have 90% style all of a sudden. But really all that matters is that 10% of substance. That's when correct. It comes to product management.
Yep, pretty much.
So AI may not be the best tool, especially if you're just taking, 2 paragraphs and turning it into 50. I think, in fact, you want to do the opposite, where you give it 50 paragraphs and it helps you find the 2 paragraphs that actually are good content. And I think that's what it comes back to, your 80 words example, your 1300 characters example. Or people sometimes look down on LinkedIn content, but these nowadays people who are packing in all the insights into 3000 characters, that's critical thinking at work.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
All right. So one of the hottest topics in product management, which I didn't realize because I watched your video on wireframes when it came out 2 years ago, which is really, really well done. And then about 6 months ago, I finally published my own guide on wireframing. And when I posted this, I got hundreds of designers commenting, what is wrong with you? PMs want to take over our job. PMs shouldn't be wireframing. What is your take on this debate, and why is it so controversial?
Sure. So I think, again, it stems from the fact of what you think is relevant for a PM. So I'll give you an example. What does a wireframe really truly communicate to the designer or any person who is looking at it? The wireframe is just essentially a visual view of how you look at the product, right? That this is how the product should behave and should give some usability to the end user, that the person will be able to figure out, oh, this product has this problem and it solves this problem in a certain way, right? The problem is that because it is so glorified, PMs have started thinking that they are the design leads at a lot of places, and this is the design which somebody has to implement, right? It is just a visual direction that you want to put from a usability perspective, that this is what I want to communicate to my end user, right? And that is where you give a lot of importance to the principles. Like, for example, two buttons having the same color, right? This looks similar, right? Add to cart, and maybe to a certain level, maybe buy now, right? Very similar colors. You will be able to give that cue to that person that basically these two are similar things. Similarly, in a wireframe, since there are no colors, you would essentially say the size of a button. It will show the importance to the designer that this is an important action that I want to take. And I think wireframes need to be designed from what narrative that I think would be relevant to the end user. And that is, so I'll give you a very good honest examples. I never did a course on wireframing. The video that you saw like 2 years back was my just general understanding of why would I place something on the left hand side and why would I not place something on the right hand side? Why would I place a button of a certain size, or why would I showcase that view to my next person or the design lead or somebody to understand that across? And it came from general common sense. At least to me, right? I haven't seen your new video, but at least to me, when I did it, it came from general common sense, right? So I think that is what people have to fundamentally understand. It is like when in engineering, you used to do mechanical drawing. When I was doing my engineering, and there is something that you have to make a 2D image into a 3D image, right? It is that view, that how do you look at from, because you know that from product thinking, the first principle told me what's the problem, right? The product thinking told me that this kind of solution might work for it. This is the product solution that might work. The design part is where the PMs should come in and say that this is my way of looking at it, what I have understood from my discovery, right? And these are the important arenas that you should focus, that this stands out. Like, why do most people in the first fold of a website talk about their credible points? You would have seen that most courses who sell, they talk about like, who are their alumni? Why would it make sense, right? They work at Google, or who is the instructor, or things like that, right? Now, this is a general trend. Similarly, if you go to a website which is selling flight tickets, the first thing that you say is from, to, and which place you have to go. That's what a wireframe should communicate, that this is my agenda. This is what I want to drive, right? The unfortunate reality is PMs start to do these wireframes by telling the designers that this is exactly what you have to ship out. This is what I think, and this is what you have to ship out. And that is designers where they take a lot of offense and say that you're encroaching my space, my creative liberty. You have to tell me what's your narrative. I have to figure it out, what is the best way to represent it, right? And you gave me a sense of it, because text does not give me the visual sense of how you look at it, right? And that's where a wireframe will give you enough feedback and give you enough context that it makes sense, right? And I think that is where the part that you're saying across, that designers, and since you probably made a very good wireframe, they took more offense. So maybe that's the cue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the more high fidelity your wireframe, the more designers are going to get upset. But if somebody actually looks in detail at your video, you're just drawing boxes on a screen. It's almost like a napkin sketch. You can also almost think of it as a product sketch. In fact, the word wireframe might be what really is throwing people off. The whole point of a product sketch is nobody's reading your 22-page PRD. So let's put a sketch at the top of it so that they at least get the mental model. An image is 1,000 words, and then a designer should apply their expertise to make that sketch, to do discovery on the solution for that sketch, to come up with a better sketch, to maybe do prototype testing. I do think that we need a reframe, and since you and I are big talk leaders in this space, though, that designers should say, this is all mine. I think the worst trend out there is that, PMs don't get access to Figma. They just have view-only seats. They don't have editor seats, and designers are so proud of this fact. I am much more in the camp of Nikita Bayer, which is like, if your product manager is not in the pixels of the design, they're not doing product management. You know what? They're just doing large company project management coordination, outsourcing to designer. And I think we need to shift the discourse among PM and designers to say, no, PMs will get in there and comment on the pixels.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because see, the sheer reason that the video of mine was also recommended to a lot of places, because the thing that you're saying is, to put you in a more deeper way, is that do you have that attention to detail, that why this pixel a certain way makes sense? Because if you don't have that attention to detail, the designer is going to take a lot of creative liberty and design it the way, because he thinks the UI or UX makes sense, right? That is where a PM comes in and says, no, this is important. You have to represent it a certain way, because I feel this is an important information for the user. Like a very simple example of that is, let's assume there is any program or any experience that you're doing, right? Even the offline tag, if there is one session which is happening offline, right, and you mentioned it in some text box somewhere, right, people will miss it 100%. Now, what is the most cool thing? That do you have that attention to detail, that while you probably put a small design element of live there or offline there, which is completely noticeable, because that's the first thing that you would know. That's a different color, that's a different tone, it's standing out. That attention to detail, and I'm with you 100% that we as product managers should be able to figure out that why a certain design is made a certain way, because of the sheer amount of components that I want to show in the screen, because that is the information that I want to convey, and say that don't miss this. Don't miss this. This is critical for you to make your purchase choice or your engagement choice or your usage choice, right? And that is where people get offended, because the moment you say that you need to put this button there, right, it seems like I'm saying design that button for me, right? But I think the better thing to say is, I think this is what I want to represent there. This is why it's important, right? And you essentially understand that to communicate it to the best way to the end user, right? And if you don't do it, there's a bit of information which I feel the product will not communicate the way that you want to communicate across. Yeah.
Love it. In your masterclass on discovery, you start with this important point that I think a lot of people neglect, which is that discovery is really about figuring out what problem you are solving. Can you double click on that and explain that?
Sure. So I think the one thing that I always keep telling people is that there are two aspects to any problem, right? The first thing is that if there is a lot of abstraction to that problem, abstraction is not something builders are really comfortable with. What I mean by abstraction is that something that is very, very vague, right? You need to first figure out that what is the truth of the truth of the truth of the truth that I really am solving here, right? And the fastest way to do it is that build a poor hypothesis, think whatever the truth that you believe in, figure out a poor TG, say that this I think is my TG, is my target group, go and take a very unbiased, open-ended interview there and have a conversation like we are having, right? Now, there will be two things that you will figure out from there, because it's an open-ended conversation, and that's why the art of even having conversations with your TG without bias is super, super important, and people do miserable at that, right? Most of the times, the user interviews that you keep doing are generally a reflection of your own bias, that you want somebody to do that, right? If you do that well, right, and you're able to really understand that whatever the person, however meaningless it might seem at that point, it doesn't matter, right? You have to understand that what is the other person truly understanding from this, whatever your problem is, which you thought is the hypothesis. And then, after doing it for a significant period of time, maybe with 10 people, 20 people, which you then try to figure out that, okay, this is the fundamental problem, X problem that I thought it was. But from the interviews, the word map that I'm making, from the focus points that people have spoken about, it seems different. What is that gap? And then you bridge that gap. I'll give you a very good example of this. So, generally, a $500 purchase in India for something like a clothing brand is an expensive purchase, right? So what really happened was, for a certain function in my family, right? And we are Kashmiris. We typically sell pashmina. Pashmina is a very famous cloth. It's an expensive cloth, right? And it's just out of like Kashmir. So one of the things that one of my uncles, he wanted to start this small store, a D2C brand on Pashmina, and he starts that brand and he prices them at $500, $550. And what to his surprise, offline he was very successful in selling this across. Nobody's buying this online. They're not spending $500, right? Now, from his hypothesis that I already have a ground network who want to buy this, right? I already have the connects who essentially would want to buy that. I have all those things. Why is a customer not really buying this? I don't understand. The price is not different. I am the same, at least I am the local person who is known everywhere. Why are people not buying this? So he goes on the ground, right? And he talks to a lot of people and says, what really decides your purchase decisions? And the insight that came out was, whenever you buy a shawl, you first try to see how it looks on you. Now, that is not something that you really discover when you're making a D2C brand and saying that this is the feature I would ship off the bat in the MVP. He actually went there and said that I'm open to ideas and I am not thinking that this is the problem that I'm solving. He went there, figured out, broke it down and understood. And the next thing that he did is actually used AI. Just used his image, put the Pashmina shawl, how does it look on me? And do you know what? The conversion skyrocketed. So he figured out the actual problem was not price. The actual problem was not that they don't trust the suppliers. The actual problem was the look on the customer, the view that the customer wants to see themselves. That was the core problem, which he didn't discover, which offline was not a problem. Obviously, the thing is with you, you can actually try it across, and he never thought about it, right? So the point that I keep always saying in discovery is that make a poor hypothesis, doesn't matter. Right? When you are early on, make a poor target persona. Think that this is my target persona. It doesn't matter. Go and actually validate that and see that whether that target persona, whether that hypothesis is something that you thought is what people are talking about. And if there is relevance, right, in the need bucket, right, if there is relevance, then you essentially go ahead and probably build some kind of MVP around it. But if you are already, if you have not done that kind of discovery and you're going there with a bias, that's where I say figure out the right problem. If you are already going there with a bias and thinking that and this interview is to validate my hypothesis without thinking about there can be a divergent thought around it, you will just hear what you want to hear. And you end up coming up with the wrong problem, and then you say, oh, I shipped out a product, but it didn't work. It didn't work. Like, that is funny. That is why, again, Akash, I know the tone of the conversation has been more on human values, but that's why I keep telling people that the first thing that you need to understand is that if you improve yourself in 2-3 quadrants, be a better listener, right? Be it an acute observer, become resourceful by nature, and don't think of criticism as good or bad criticism. Only think of it as actionable or non-actionable criticism. If you think like that, you'll be able to uncover a lot of amazing things about the customer. And if you're able to uncover that, you have that edge. You always have that design edge. You always have the thought edge that you want to put across. So I think that is where discovery is. The discovery is, do I look at the entire system and cover all the unknown unknowns and make them into known unknowns? That this is what I do. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, the best people at discovery have that critical thinking basis that we talked about. So you've done some good problem discovery. You've maybe even sketched out a wireframe. What is your take on the PRD? Because what I've noticed is that when push comes to shove, let's say they hire a new product leader above you, his first way to judge you is going to be, oh, how are your PRDs? Or if there are 2 PMs and only one can be promoted to lead PM, they'll go look at, oh, who is writing better PRDs? I just find that it's a common basis of comparison. So how do you as a PM kind of compare better than others?
Sure. So I think, again, very nice question that you asked though. So I think a PRD, as I have mentioned in one of my videos, seems like a love letter to engineering. Well, they don't see that as a love letter a lot of times, but it is like if Shravan is not there, it communicates the same thing to engineering, right? It gives the same depth, right? So I think most PMs start thinking that PRD is a more execution level document, which has components of execution level, things, right? But I think it is also a narrative setting document. Right? That is a very crystal clear thing, because your PRD not only is just read by the engineers, but the CXOs might also want a summary at some point and say that, what do you really mean by it, right? So a lot of times when I think is that first is define a very clear objective, actionable objective, that this is what I want to drive. If you're again vague there, that's not an objective. It's called objective for a reason. It's not called subjective for a reason. So it's called, so you define that. Then probably talk a little bit about why is the problem important? Why would I solve it? Why is it meaningful for the business, for the user, right? And you are able to do that very well, right? That's the second thing. The third thing is, then you come up with some level of a high level solution and say that this is what I feel, that this is the right solution, that it's a very, very high level solution that you essentially say that this might be the thing. So once you have established the objective very well, once you have said that why is the problem relevant, why any one of the CXOs should give an attention here, or any of the engineering people should give an attention to the problem, because if this is not clear to your engineering team, they will always feel that I'm shipping out code and some far-fetched corner of the product, I don't know what it's doing for the customer, right? So you need to call that out very well, right? This is what the narrative should, and then you essentially say, oh, maybe this is the top level solution that I think of, and this is why it works. Once that is done, then if you have a solution in mind and a journey in mind, so the top level solution is generally for you to think of what is the envisaged journey which this solution will essentially bring across. Like, for example, I'll give you a very good example of how courses are done today, and how courses should be, like, and that is why products like Superhuman moved to the philosophy of flow, right? I don't think people today have very poor attention spans, as people say. I think they have very poor curiosity spans. That's what I feel, right? What I mean by curiosity span is there is so much information in the world. In 5 seconds, I want to decide that I want to give the next 10 minutes to this thing or not, right? And if that is not there, right, you would definitely not read it, right? The same thing that I want to put across in the PRD. It should essentially set across a narrative which is interesting for you to read and say that, oh wow, this is why it is relevant. This is why even as a CXO, as a VP sales or a VP product, I should give time to this because it is a critical problem and I was able to define it very well, right? Then you come to the high level solution. Then you say, okay, this is what Shravan is saying, because a VP product or an SVP product is not going to go into feature flows and say that these are the 18 pages of flows that you've written across, that this will happen, this will happen. The person would want to understand what is the overall journey that you're saying, right? Like, for example, if somebody comes to my page and says, is this program for me or not, right? There are certain X number of questions, right? Do I solve them through a generative AI layer? Somebody just comes, right, so I am this background, and I get that information. So I have a high level solution. And then based on that high level solution, you also come up with the right metrics, that this is the way to measure. Now, this is where the document ends for the CXO. The CXO is not going to beyond this. They're saying that, oh, I understand what's the objective. I understand why it's a relevant problem. I understand what he's communicating through his solution. And I understand how he's going to measure the success of that solution. And maybe if you want to put targets or whatever you want to put across, depending on some contextual benchmarks that you have, great, right? That is where a CXO would say, and that should be the first step of the document. It should not be the last thing that you write everything and then you say, this is why I'm doing this. Post that, I think then the persona changes, because then it goes to engineering and somebody who wants to execute, the engineering manager who wants to understand. That is where your attention to detail and your depth shows, which shows how do you write your feature flows well, right? Have you given thought to edge cases and clearly called them out, right? And written them meticulously. It takes time. It is not something that you easily will be able to do on the first go, but you will have to spend. So you spend considerable amount of time on the feature flows. And like you rightly said, if those feature flows are visual in some way, that's amazing. A picture speaks 1,000 words, right? You will be able to give that across, that this is what I mean by it. Once you have done that, another thing that I feel is very, very underrated in a PRD is people generally know that what is the fastest way to know that whether a problem is working or a solution is working or not? There should be some metric, right? But there should be the right ingestion metric, right? There should be the right ingestion of data. So people give a lot of less importance on nomenclature and ingestion of data. That is something that should be very, very well thought, that if I really want my experiment to work, right? Am I capturing data the right way? Am I doing that? Because if I'm not doing it well, then whatever you will get from that output is not going to make sense, and you would probably again end up making biased decisions. I'll give you another example to this. So one of my very good friends, he was a staff software engineer at Google, right? And when he ran his program, so he essentially saw there that he wrote that he made a very difficult onboarding form where people have to write answers, deep answers to get into, because you want to filter well. On the first day, because of his sheer distribution, he thought that he'll get like 500 applications for his program. He got like 90 applications. And he was like, wow, now will I even get students for the program for me to run? Right? And that was, again, a very biased choice to make. Right? And what happened is, post that, out of those 90, 70 converted. Right? So he never needed 500 people. The reason was he thought that in general, there are 500 programs, and out of that, there will be a good 20% conversion, and that is why it will work. Right? So you need to define what data are you capturing, and is there an intent? Like, what I mean here is, not every application which has a simple form means the same submission is of the same value. Right? There might be a difference in the quality of submissions, right? So you might need to prioritize or weight that specifically variable in a different way. Then you define that, and you essentially say, this is how I will measure data. These are the metrics that I look at. And I think the last two parts, which are again a lot of PMs do miss, is that how does it go to the customer? Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that the PMM will define the GTM, but you should also, and the GTM doesn't necessarily have to be just customer facing. It can be internal also. It can be, how will you teach your sales team? How will you teach your customer success team that they essentially get queries and they handle them across, right? And the final thing is, if you kind of put that across and say that these are the FAQs that I want to put across, or the pros and cons that I want to kind of talk about of my solution, of my PRD that I'm putting up, which I'm calling out upfront, right? So the first part is again the hook, which is important for most critical people to get aligned at one place, that this is the right problem I'm solving. Second part is to show detailed depth as a product manager to engineering that I've thought of all cases, right? The third part is coming from an aspect that I know how to measure the success of this solution, and it will be visible to everyone, right? And then the fourth part is, I know the criticalities, I know the challenges very well, and how it goes to the customer. So I think that is why I say it's a love letter. It starts with the story, and that it ends with some actionable, that this is what I want to do. Yeah.
Love it. All right, so that's our section on PM craft. I want to move into some PM hot topics. And we've mentioned it a couple times. You mentioned you use GPT and as a creator. We talked a little bit about how I don't like when PMs take 2 sentences and turn it into a 50-paragraph document. So going now the layer deeper, what AI tools should PMs be using in their day-to-day work, and how should they be using them?
Sure. I think to start off with, GPT is a very powerful tool. I think people generally don't use it to its fullest of its potential, right? Like, I'll give you an example. For me, it does bunch of things for me. And I want to give you actionable examples so that people can think, oh, wow, this was also a use case. We never used it, right? So a lot of times, GPT helps me correct my messages which I send to my team. That how do I structure them well? Like, for example, it is like, do a very good prompt and it will help you structure that tone, that tonality. It will shape that across. That you want this message to be motivational to the end team, right? It will ensure that you're using the right words for it. Right? So that is something amazing, that you write your own thing and you tell GPT that put some tone to this, because a lot of the craft comes from the fact that how do you motivate the other team to do it? Like, that's one. Second thing that I personally feel is that GPT also allows you to discover topics. Right? Like, for example, a lot of times if I want to understand that, oh, how do I do deeper discovery? Right? Or how do I understand systems better? Give me some esoteric book which is deep and wise. Right? I want to read them. I want to read an esoteric article, right? Again, it does that for you, because Googling that kind of an article is a hard thing, or figuring that out on Twitter and figuring out that who to follow, why to follow. There's a knowledge graph, right? It helps you do that. I think that's the second most important thing, that it helps you. It always gives you an anchor point that if you're stuck in a problem, it'll give you some prompt that maybe this is a place to start. you go and check that out. I think that's the second thing. The third thing that I very functionally also feel is that a lot of time it helps you build very strong heuristics, right? What I mean by very strong heuristics is that, for example, if you're building a product, right? How should I look at this problem from a component structure? Like you say, there is ambiguity in a problem, that if I want to design this system, or if there is for me is, how do you design a very powerful referral network? Right? Now, the basic way for me is to go and check out referral things and general articles around it. But if you give contextual queries to GPT, that this is the type of audience that I have, it acts like your friend and your co-pilot, and it can have that conversation with you and help you structure and distill your thoughts, right? This is the third part. The fourth part is it gives me a lot of good ability to write better, right? And become better at my writing, become better at my communication, become better at my storytelling, right? That's the fourth thing that it does. And I think then ancillary tools on top of it, like Midjourney and other things, right? They're also super powerful, because if I want to put across a narrative, better than text, a better an image, right? It helps me do that also, right? So Midjourney is very powerful that way. I've recently started using some other models around that only. Like I'm looking for content and short generation through Midjourney, that it helps across and puts that content across. So it's very useful in building distribution, right? Now the beautiful part is, like you rightly said, is that if it's garbage in, if your prompt or if your quality of your prompt is not well, it's going to throw garbage out only. It's not going to work, right? So you need to set some context that if this is, you want to think of it as a conversation maker, rather than think of it somebody doing your tasks for you. It's not going to solve your tasks. It's going to enable them better. It's going to like one of the things that I keep doing, and I keep tell my designer to do it. Design your thing, put it in GPT, tell him to improve the page. Just give me a sense of what will you do to improve the page, to improve the funnel conversion. And it comes up with insane recommendations that this is how you should think. And that is such a powerful thing to do. So meaningfully, it is helping me write better content, which is saving me a lot of time. It is helping me discover better content, which was again a very, very important problem, because there was content discovery platforms. They're poor in discovery. Honestly, like if you go to LinkedIn or you go to Twitter, it's hard to find good people unless and until over time you make that network. That, oh, I follow Akash, and then Akash is following somebody else, then I start following that person also. So I think that's the second thing it does. It saves me a lot of time over there. The third thing it helps me is remove my redundancies on small heuristics that I want to, like, what is an application quality? If I just tell GPT that this is patience, look at the application in terms of gratitude, discovery, resilience, how the tonality of the messages, it will give you a very good indicator of that this person is a fit or this. So it removes those and I think the fourth thing it does is it enables me to produce a lot of contextual information as a PM, which enables me to lead the team better, set better strategic narratives, and save a lot of time for other people. So I think that is where, so it has given me the ability to improve my discovery significantly and also remove dependencies in my execution. So those $20 that I pay every month, right, probably is worth $2,000, right, every month, right? That's the first thing that I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, the ROI is extremely high on those, although I personally pay for Claude instead of ChatGPT. What is the future of product management in this world? And let's go ahead and forecast, right? Right now we're on GPT, I guess you could say like 4.5, 01, right? It's like, in between 4 and 5. We know that the jump from 2 to 3, 3 to 4 was insane. It was mind-blowing, right? So we can imagine mind-blowing jumps to 5, to 6, to 7. In the world of 7, I imagine designers are going to be putting prompts to get their first version of their design. Engineers are going to be having much more reliable code writing that isn't as bad as it is today. What is the future of product management in this world of GPT-7?
Amazing. I think this is a question that I keep asking. It has two aspects to it, right? I think one of the things that they did it by releasing that 4.01 or something like that, the model is 01, that the model that they recently released, it has analytical compute capabilities, which are like conversational or product solving, mathematical problem solving capabilities that it had. What I personally feel is that the component of discovery and looking at a problem, because the element of code is that it still doesn't understand emotions that well. So there is a creative liberty that comes with us humans, right? If you become better at that, right, and you understand emotions very well, because eventually you're building products for humans who are emotional beings, right? That understanding till the bot or the probably the model doesn't have, you'll always be a better discoverer of content. It's like life is not like chess, right? It's like poker, right? Unpredictable things happen, right? And unpredictable behavior happens, right? That is not something that you can write in a uniform form of code, because the fundamental assumption of any machine learning model is that there's a set of instructions, and based on those set of it keeps improving its set of instructions and keeps improving it, makes it better, but there is still a set of instructions. The thing is, for most systems like us, like human systems, the adaptability is that there will always be a certain bit of chaos. And that chaos, what truly is chaos is that the risk that is after you have done everything. That's chaos, right? So that element is a function of emotional thought process. That is a function of why I find certain thing very valuable. People have parasocial relationships with personalities. Why does that happen, right? You've never seen Shravan. You've never talked to him. Why do you think he's your elder brother? And if he says that you make this purchase choice, they'll make this purchase choice no matter what you essentially do, right? So I think that is the part that I would really want to focus about. That discovery as an element where you can understand the tenets of human code level system, analytical systems and social systems together, PMs will always be relevant. Always be relevant, because that is something not, at least for the considerable future, I can see that. But the thing is, if you are someone who has a redundant task that is giving you your livelihood as a PM, like for example, if you think that doing a PM role is just about writing documents, not putting out a strategic narrative and showing that documents to 5 different teams and getting it executed over a daily basis in small tasks, I don't think you'll be relevant after a very small. It will do the entire damn thing for you in like 10 minutes, right? So you need to improve your compute. If you're not improving your compute, if you're not able to understand systems better, if you're not able to understand that there is overlap between systems, that product that you're building and the team that you're building it is also one system. Who is building it? Why that person is, why is he motivated enough to build it, right? It is that trait to essentially get that change done through different people, through different interactions, looking at divergent views. That is, I think, something that GPT can't do today. So if you are good at that, in ensuring that the discovery systems, whether they are human, whether they are team-based systems, they are really on track and aligned, you are safe. I don't think there will be a lot of problem for you, right? But if you think that the role is just going there, doing a bunch of documents, sitting there, telling the engineer to do this task, not giving context around that, I think those things are going to get automated. Like, I don't think that in the next 2 years, we are going to see a lot of things. So maybe the wireframe videos that we did probably will not be relevant after 2 years that we did across. So I think in a very simple way, I just want to put across is that discovery and general judgment-based decision making, because you're involved with a lot of emotional systems that you essentially want to put across. I think that a sense of art, music, which is tied deeply to the person that you are, I think that is not something GPT will be able to replicate very easily. But the menial tasks, the redundant tasks, they're going to go away. It will write you a boilerplate just off the bat. Yeah.
110%. It's about double clicking on those human aspects. GPT is not going to be able to attend meetings for you. It's not going to be able to appease an upset VP of sales or help an engineer respond to a Slack question. So that's where you want to plug in. So the other hot topic in product management these days is founder mode, right? Paul Graham wrote about founder mode versus manager mode. The entire idea is like, be like Brian Chesky. You know, what did Brian Chesky do? He took most of the decision making away from product managers. He said, I'm going to micromanage every single release. I'm going to be involved in every single design. What is your advice for PMs dealing with these micromanaging founders who are in founder mode?
I think I generally, so I'll give you a very contrarian view to this, is that I generally don't feel that if essentially there are certain types of people that you can work with where you can't work with. There is always compute differences. So the problem with this, the thesis, the narrative that it went bad, and a lot of people didn't like it. I think what Paul Graham was trying to say in that sense was that if you don't have that amount of meticulousness or that earnestness that this is my product, you will be super critical about things. Okay, no, I know I'm the best person because I'm deeply vested, right? That typically happens in your early team because they are aligned with your vision. Post that, it's just an incentive-based game. You want to work at Netflix because it gives you top-of-the-line compensation and a brand, right? You don't think that it's your family or it's the place which is going to make or break it. It's probably going to give you a certain amount of wealth and stature and everything, right? The problem there is that generally happens because I'll give you a very good example. Like, for example, if you start a consulting company and you are a product manager, right? And you start that company and you are the founder, right? You will start looking at things from your own lens and how efficient I am. Whenever a new client comes to me and says that ship this out for me, right? You will start saying that, oh wow, if I was so meticulous because it is my stake at the line, it's my company at the line, right? It is my time and effort that I'm putting across. So I want the other person to be competent, right? And I want the other person to be meticulous, right? But typically what happens is when a PM who's not that driven would obviously come up with a solution where the founder, because he's so driven and he's just thinking about the same damn problem every single day, he's going to tell you, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. This is something that you missed. This is something that you missed. And that is what is underappreciated. That shows lack of empathy. But I think that is the reason you would see that there are two categories of people. People say who really admire Elon Musk or who hate him. Say, no, I don't want to work with this person. This is not. And there are some people who are gaga over him. Like, he made us a better person. He made us a better operator. This is something that you should look at, right? So I think it is a function of hiring, right? A lot. That what values do you want to hire for? Right? And unfortunately, most of our hiring systems today are focused a lot on harder values, like the hard skills. That are you good at solving an algorithm? Are you able to see that problem well, right? And great. The behavioral interviews don't do that justice because you are a complex person. You're not just, Akash is not just a podcaster or a product leader. He's also a friend. He's a father, or he's a husband, right? So there are elements to your personality, right, which make you fit in a culture or not. And because 98% of the systems fail to do a poor job at it, right, you end up hiring gaps in decision making. The person might be competent at a certain thing, but there is a gap that you wanted that thing to happen, but it is not there, right? And that is the reason for me as an early stage founder, because I started the business like a year back, right? It is very hard because you are expecting the same competence that I bring as a product manager in the system, which is a newbies, which are early stage people, to give you the same amount of commitment and value that you want to put across. It doesn't happen. So the answer to that is you need to become empathetic. You need to figure out that what are the battles that you're willing to lose, that you can give them those problems and say that experiment, learn. Right? Because this is a battle I can afford to lose. There are certain battles which you can't, which are like the primary flows of your product, where your founder mode is actually, which is the driving force, which makes things happen. It's the willpower. It's the courage of the founder, which essentially takes you from one side to another side. But then there should be certain allowances that if you don't allow the other person to make a mistake, that person has not learned anything. He's just doing the instructions that you're putting across. He's acting like an AI. It's not actual intelligence, right? So I think as a founder, you need to be very clear that what are my non-negotiables, what I cannot let other people screw up. And if I want to get in and be a micromanager there, makes sense. Not a problem, because it is evident to other people also that if it goes for a toss, the company or the business goes for a toss, or that vertical goes for a toss, or that product goes for a toss. But there are tons of other problems where you need to be empathetic, where you would say, great, you made a mistake. Why don't you essentially try to do it like this? And there you act as a friend. There you say that I want you to learn. There you say, I want you to chart a growth path for yourself and learn that. And the last thing that I think people generally fail to understand is, because a founder is someone who is tied to a vision. He's able to see the same thing which he wants after 5 years, at least in his mind. dreamer or something like whatever you want to call it. The product manager doesn't. So there is a lot of function of how do you communicate? How do you keep communicating it across as a founder to other people so that they also start becoming that driven and say, oh, wow, this is the large scale incentive. And it brings that ability. And once that sync is there, I think the micromanagement bit goes away. Because then you trust the other person and you say, okay, he is as meticulous or she's as meticulous as I am. Right? For a lot of people who already have that trait, they excel. Right? For other people, you have to build that growth path. So one of my early managers, he used to say this thing that the duty of a founder is to do the 3 G's. First is the grow, then is glow, and then is go. What do you mean by you let your team grow, right? Then you give them credit and make them glow. And at the right time, tell them the hardest decision that this is the next bit for you, that you should essentially do, and then you let them go. Right? So I think that is the true essence of founder mode, and I do understand, empathize where he comes from, why did he write it. But I think when there is asynchronous abstraction, things always are taken out of context. You would never be able to understand what he exactly did. Yeah.
Glow, grow, and go. That is a wonderful framework. All right. In this last bit of our conversation, I want to shift to you. So starting at the top, a lot of people will know you for your highly viral LinkedIn memes. And, in preparation for each podcast, the night before, I go through everybody's like most viral LinkedIn post. That's like my first step in the process. And I was just scrolling for hundreds. I mean, hundreds. You have hundreds of posts that have gotten like 10,000 likes on LinkedIn. And these are viral memes. So what is your meme process?
Sure. So I think, again, thank you very much for asking this question. This is something I don't talk about. So I haven't talked about it at a lot of places. So the first thing that when I started writing on LinkedIn, the first thing that I noticed was that what is my persona? I'm a funny guy. I like humor, right? It eases the tension in every situation. It allows you to have that conversation. It allows you to go beyond certain dynamics. I can be friends with a musician. I can be friend with a mathematician, right? I can do both things, right? Because it diffuses, because human values in terms of humor are very similar, right? So the first thing when I started writing on LinkedIn, I noticed was I am not going to write boring stuff. I'm not going to do that. What is first principle thinking? What is design thinking? What is the framework to do this or that or etc.? I don't want to do that, because anyway, people who are reading LinkedIn, they're majorly coming from 2 aspects. Either they want to network or they want a job, right? These are all, for most people, they are in jobs which they generally don't like. It's the situation that essentially brought them into that job. It is maybe 5% or 7% or 10% of people who end up doing what they like. Right? So for most people, it is an avenue to essentially learn and essentially grow into the type of role that they desire. Right? So I said that and it is a struggle for a lot of people, because not everybody has driven that I want to do this thing because I genuinely like it. There is no external, and as you rightly said, everybody wants to go to Google. Maybe out of the 100 people who go to Google, 10 are super driven because of the problem and etc. 90 are driven by compensation, culture, people around them, brand and everything. So it is an external thing, right? And when you're doing things for external things, any information that's coming your way, it doesn't feel like an intrinsic drive. It feels like a necessity, that this information should be with me, then only I'll be able to do it. So I already knew that people are already consuming so much information about this. They have to retain this. One thing I want to do is that I want to help people, right? And the first thing that I realized was that if they don't take anything away from me, at least they should laugh. At least they should feel uplifted, motivated. Maybe my post didn't do any insight to them, but because of my post, they laughed and they got the motivation to stay for 20 minutes longer, and they saw something else. I think that was the first part where I really wanted to kind of talk about and I really feel that memes change the world. It gives you so much reflection of what you want to say in a very small, meaningful way. And I'm telling you, so a lot of people ask me this also, are your memes meaningful? Trust me, I have gotten so many examples that people have not released on a Friday because I posted a meme that don't release on a Friday. And trust me, it worked wonders. Believe me, this was an insight, an anecdote that they took away, that I won't release on a Friday. And that is fun, right? Similarly, one of my memes which went viral was in which there was this engineering manager at Postman who said, at least this requirement is clear. So I wrote something about that, and the person comments, at least this. Now, if you look at it as a third person, it tells you about the banter of a real product manager and an engineering manager. And if you look deep enough, it tells you the cue also, that you need to be meticulous about your requirements, right? That is something that, so I keep saying this, there is this Hindi word, I'm not sure whether your audience will appreciate it, but I used to say these things. I say, Vidya insan apni shamta ke anusar hi grahan karta hai. It is the ability of the receiving person to discern that the message that I've said, for a person, the message that I say can change their life. That this is how I look at life. For another person, it might just be another banter who or she will forget after 10 minutes. But I knew that, so my meme thought process is generally about looking at the most recent news, building some inference out of it, and what is the most funny way to essentially talk about that satire, that this is how it works, right? It gives the message. It's not very hard on your brain, right? That you have to focus and think about it, and it gives you good vibes. I think these are, and that's why it went viral. And it in retrospect, it also gave that inference that Shravan is reachable. He is someone who you can talk to. He is someone who we can learn from, right? And that is why, and that is the reason I don't post memes on my YouTube channel. I don't typically, because my YouTube channel is like super focused on like high quality content. I want to do that. Whatever I do is on LinkedIn, because it is tied to that persona. If I didn't have a YouTube channel, right, I don't think I would be posting these many memes, because it also sends a different narrative, right? The reason I have a YouTube channel where I talk about deep topics, right? People end up going there. They know he's an educator, and then they come to memes and then they say, oh wow, this is just a persona. He's accessible. It shows the good value. Yeah.
All right. And you recently went full time on this creator thing. We actually both did right around the exact same time. I'm curious if you're willing to share. Are you earning more or less as a creator than you were before? Because you were a director of product. I'm sure you're very good at your job. I'm sure you had to become a VP of product, CPO. Are you earning more, and are you liking it more?
Sure. So I think, again, the question is broken down. As a creator, if you would have asked me, and if I was a one person, I am definitely making more money. 100%, right? But I am using those finances to build the company that I want to. So if you ask me as a net thing, I'm making less money than what I was making as a director, right? Or as a advisor to a lot of people, right? But in terms of sheer value proposition from a niche perspective, yes. If it was a one-man show and I wanted to just do a program and not run a community SaaS platform at the back end of it, build other products, 100% lucrative. 100%. This is something that's a function of the storytelling ability, the depth that I've built over the years, and it's paying off, right? And that I pretty much makes sense. And even from like, for today, in my context, the way that I'm building Rethink Systems as a platform is generally about using those finances to build some kind of asynchronous products which remove my dependency as a creator less and less. And I choose to do the things that I want to do, right? I don't just want to just do a product management program. That's a good thing that I'm good at. But there are a bunch of other things that I want to do, right? And bunch of other products that I want to build, right? I think that is where this skill set of mine as a creator, right, is enabling me to do the other things. Right? Yeah.
All right. And at Rethink Systems, and you might have more revenue sources broadly, maybe you can tell us in just percentage terms, like what are the products or services that are driving your revenue mix?
Sure. So I think I'll give you a basic 30-second gist of what Rethink Systems is. Like, Rethink Systems stemmed from system dynamics. Rethink any system that you want to do, right? The program that I built is heavily focused on metacognition. It is not an entry-level program. It is not for people who are just moving into product. It is typically for people who are up to a certain stage, like PMs, SPMs. Like 25% of my batch is typically SPMs, right? Who come here, who essentially want to become better leaders, better thinkers, and things like that, right? Now, this is an acquisition channel, which obviously has its revenue, which may be like 30% of the total revenue the company makes, right? Which is the program that I run, which is a lucrative program. It's a slightly expensive program in this part of the world, obviously, right? But there are more expensive programs in the US, but in this part of the world, it is one of the most expensive programs that exist for the duration that I run. Then I leverage this community, this very same community, because this is a very curated people. This is somebody who's a senior PM at Amazon, who is a product lead at Google or some other. What the other thing that happened as a creator was a lot of founders used to reach out to me saying that, why don't you angel invest? Why don't you build a product for me? Right now, I don't have that flexibility, but I do have a community which is high intent, which is hungry, So I take people from there, essentially help them, like community as a service, launch their products, whatever they need, and we build products for. And again, that is that arm where we are acting as an accelerator. We are not necessarily a dev agency where you come up with requirements and say you have to ship it out. We actually help you figure out your problem. What's your PMF? Why would you want to solve this problem? So that's the accelerator arm, which does around 30-35% again. And then there is the third arm, which is the events arm. Right, where we do events all across the country, where we call global leaders, and these are again different types of events. Some events are super premium, right, where somebody who's an SVP at Publicis Sapient, somebody who's a CMO of Flipkart, somebody who is probably the SVP at Microsoft, they would come in, and these are slightly premium events where we essentially charge maybe like $100 for a day. Right? At least in India, it's an expensive number. Like if you're charging $8,000 a day, and then that is where 15% kind of type of revenue comes across. And then there's the last arm where we are essentially building some AI tools for different startups. What I mean by that is, like, one of the problems that we are trying to tackle is that engineering hiring is still slightly sorted, at least at an early level, because you know what you have to measure, right? The structured thinking, algorithmic complexity, runtime, and things like that. But how do you know he's a good designer? It's a very vague thing to say. You might find something very nice versus I don't, right? So for ambiguous roles and for early stage startups, what really happens is that they end up hiring somebody as a director of product, and by the time they realize 3 months are gone, they've already spent like 20-30 lakh rupees, and the culture is gone, everything, because that person comes with a certain kind of expertise and certain kind of changes that the person put across. So we are minimizing those 3 months into 10 days and saying that these are the 5 people you need to interview, because we have checked for like core values, like, does this person have discovery? Does this person have humility? And how is that evident? Through certain things that we do. Like, how do you even frame an email? It's a very simple task. It's the kind of words that you choose, which essentially show what kind of person you are. So I think that is where we are building a model which is helping you improve your hiring pipeline in a better way. And similar products we'll be building across, right? Like, how do you essentially build a recorded course? Most of the recorded course don't have a feeling where you essentially want to drive higher completion rates. It is because of poor feedback, not contextual feedback. So we're building an AI layer where you essentially build something like a knowledge graph, and you essentially come up with the fact that knowledge graph essentially tells you where you stand, what do you have to do, and what do you have to move towards, right? And measures your competencies in a way that a normal GPT model or a non-self-tuned model is not able to do that. You'll take like 2 hours figuring it out on GPT to get the answer of the same question that you want to do it. So we are building some ancillary products around it. But 30% is the program that I run, and 30% would be the building arm, the accelerator arm that we have. 15% would be events, and 15% would be experimental products, which we essentially do across. Yeah.
Tired of spending your days and nights managing all your paperwork processes with multiple tools? Good news. Today's podcast partner, Anvil, is a document AI that helps you build software for your paperwork processes at ludicrous speed. Turn your PDFs into templates in seconds. Anvil Document AI identifies input fields, assigns labels, and even prepares your document for signature. What if you could transform your templates into web forms in the blink of an eye and embed them into your application for a seamless user experience? The best part? Anvil separates your structured data from your PDFs so you can power your business with data, not documents, making it fully operational. The next time you're stuck processing PDFs, creating web forms, or gathering e-signatures, remember, you can do it faster with Anvil Document AI. So visit useanvil.com/Akash. That's useanvil.com/Akash, AAKASH. Don't get PDF'd. One of the most unique creator businesses out there. You won't hear that revenue split from most people. And one of the other really unique elements about your business, I go and I speak to many product management communities, probably like one a week. The one I spoke at with you 9 months ago was easily the most engaged I have ever seen. I'm talking about in the actual conversation, the types of emojis and chats and engagement you brought with the group. After the conversation, the types of social media posts that were put about it, the types of messages people sent me, yours was easily 100x anybody else. Like, I probably got like 200 LinkedIn connection requests the minute after I logged off. So you really have built like one of the most vibrant communities. What are your top tips for building communities like that?
Sure. I think this is the most heartfelt question because nobody asked me this, that how hard it is to build a community. So I'll tell you the honest story. So I always knew this very early on only, that a collection of people at a single place is not a community. You have 2,000 people in a WhatsApp group and you call it a community. I'm sorry. Then you have no clue what's a community then. A community has a purpose. It has an ethos. A community of moms to become better moms. A community of doctors to become better doctors. Right? And this is what I knew very early on, that to build ethos, because this is something like, if you go and tell someone that Akash is my friend, can you trust me, right? Is there a way to measure trust? There is no KPI to measure trust. It's rooted in anecdotal behavior, right? That how are you talking to me, whether you reach out to me in places when you feel down. Now, that is what I was talking about, that what is the true value of a human? It's the ethic that the person follows. If you don't have an ethic, right, and that is deeply rooted in your value system, people will never develop intrinsic motivation. It's not going to work. If you think that you will do events, how many events will you do? How many events? Like, you think that you'll hire a community manager and that person is doing 15 events or 2 events each month, right? Not going to work, right? It will work once, twice, thrice, even if it's not going to scale. It's hard to do that, right? Because you are expecting that there is some external incentive that for which the person would, like mock interviews. Even if you make a mock interview platform, people are not going to use your product, even if it's the most best product in the world, because they lost that use case. The use case was only till they wanted a job. That's why they were using your product like tens of times, 20s of. The moment they got a job, the utility will go down in spite of you might having the best product in the world. Because the intent is not there. So I was very focused on this, that I want to develop intent. Right? And how do you develop intent? People typically talk a lot about, a lot of books have been written on this, that what intent does for you. Like, it makes you successful and whatever and whatnot. But not a lot of books have been written. How do you develop intent? Now that's again, like telling someone that intrinsically you become a good product manager and a problem solver and write good documents and there is no incentive tied to it. I don't think people do that. People, that's a very hard thing to do. So what I did, I created a group, and one of the things that I knew was 2 things will work. 1, I have to practice what I preach. If I tell people to write, I have to write. If I don't write, because they are seeing me as a person to emulate, that's one. And the second thing is consistently build these principles. Be generous, be kind. If that is a behavior, I don't care which background you come from, you're out. If you cannot maintain a certain basic value system in the community, and how do you do it? Consistently grill it. That is the reason I designed the program so hard. Like, I knew that this is not a run-of-the-mill program where you would say that I will just spend 10 hours a week and then I'll do 8 weeks and then I get a certification at the end of it. No, you need to legit earn it. It takes heart and soul, but like your life for the next 8 weeks becomes hell, because that is every day I'm telling them to do better discovery, do go deeper. And these are the small human attributes which I keep enforcing, which now what happened initially, it was the first 50 students. I gave them so valuable experience. They paid me like $500. Like was not really meaningful when I started the first batch, right? When the first community that I started, right? But I taught them to the best of my ability. Whatever I didn't have to teach them, that also I taught them. So those students became my ambassadors. They're not just your promoters. They became your ambassadors. They got that parasocial relationship, that they deeply connected with you. They thought of yourself that this person is my family member. He is something like a person like that. And do you know what happened? Those 50 brought the next 100. The next 100, again the same kind of experience. They became very powerful. And it is that ethos that started permeating. And after like now we are starting the fourth program with another 80 students, with 15 from the US, 5 from Germany, 50, 60 again. And I would love to call you again, by the way, if that's the thing. But then again, but the thing is that those notes, because people initially started to changing, those notes started ringing to other people also, because the communication was again and again. It was consciously permeated that frequency is a function of, it changes you if you are consistently frequent with those things, right? And we started doing it to a point that it became a place where bad actors started moving out apne aap. People who don't connect, who think that I'm just outcome oriented, because every damn person around you is not outcome oriented, they're process oriented, right? They love the fact that if we do really good in our process, that's what is under our control, and we have to be meticulous. It's like this Simon Sinek quote that he says, you don't rise to the glory of the occasion, you fall to the level of your preparation. So that's the attitude that we started building in the community, that I will be the best damn operator no matter what I do. I don't think in the perspective that my ability is going to lead to something, but if I am the best at something and I keep improving myself, outcomes will be apparent. They will be apparent. And that started permeating, but it took a lot of guts, like sitting with students. I spent hours and hours sitting with them, solving their problems. For 9-10 months, I couldn't make, like VCs were reaching out to me, make a deck. I said, I don't have time to make a deck. I don't, because it's so hard to do. And bad actors started moving out, and slowly, the principles of kindness, generosity, honesty, integrity, resilience, these started showing reflections in anecdotal behavior. Like somebody reaching out to me, I don't feel worthless anymore. Now that's a feedback. That's super powerful. If you essentially somebody reaching out to me and saying that I'm a better human, more than a better product manager, right? And that is the reason you see the kind of love and engagement, because it's very intrinsically driven. And it took like 6-8 months to instill that behavior, that think beyond this. The world is not only dog eat dog, that everybody is there for some incentive. Sometimes it is all about that the network, the people that you want to be, appreciate relationships. And those values, once they started ingesting in people, they automatically started becoming better at their product quirks. And that's why they started. And that is why the entire thesis, even the second vertical that you talked about, Axel, how is it working? If the only incentive was money, that a person is coming and you're shipping out product, how will they bring that care, that honesty, that authenticity in the product, that visible thinking in the product? It can only happen when you have an ethos. That it stems from the founder, it stems from the core pillars of the community. And that is why we were able to ship out. Now, for example, this model is very prevalent. There are tons of accelerators across the world. What makes us different? It is the care. It is the ethos that comes, and that is evident in the way you talk to a client. You do your discovery well. You will read about that person. You do all of those things. So I think that is where, so a focus on the fundamental ethics of a person is what makes the community very well. And that's why I end up saying that it's not, I have been a product manager. That's why it's a product program. If I would have been an engineering manager, it would have been an engineering program. But the principles would have been the same. Yeah.
Amazing, Shravan. So much insights and advice over 3 hours. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely, Akash. I think I've always been a fan. I love your content. You're someone I look up to. You're a friend. I think you have seen my ups and downs also. So I think as a person, it's always amazing to talk to you. And whatever little I could contribute to your audience, it was super amazing for me too. Thank you very much for calling me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.